Chapter 272. Not many people visited the intelligence office in the branch because there were spies of the blood-clothed pavilion in all the cities in Donglin County. If they wanted to carry out a task in a certain place, it was best to get first-hand information from a place. Therefore, there were almost no people in this place. Lung Shichi walked over and asked the gray-clothed disciple in charge, "I want information about Tang Hapu, the legitimate son of the Tang family." "Sir, please wait a moment. In the Phantom Spirit's secret realm, someone could contact him through the Jade Sword and know that he was Lung Shichi." This matter had always made him fearful. Now, he had to figure out before he left so that he could rest assured. Soon, the gray-clothed disciple came back with a thick piece of information. Lung Shichi paid him and read it on the spot. The first 90% of the information was nonsense, and only the last paragraph attracted him. Tang Hapu was killed by Lung Shichi, the black-clothed killer of the blood-clothed pavilion at the Golden Wing Academy. Seeing this, Lung Shichi frowned. The information directly stated that he had killed Tang Hapu. If this information was provided by the blood-clothed pavilion, it would be understandable. But if not, it meant that his information had been leaked. So he asked, "I want to know, how did others know that Tang Hapu was killed by Lung Shichi?" The gray-clothed disciple replied, "This is the news from the Tang family. They have confirmed that Lung Shichi killed Tang Hapu through elimination one by one, and Lung Shichi is ranked second in the Tang family's kill order." Lung Shichi's heart skipped a beat. The first one must be Bing Shang. What made him a little dumbfounded was that the Tang family had confirmed his identity through elimination. He also knew that when the employer came to the blood-clothed pavilion to issue a task, he would get a list of the names of the killers. Some killers were famous, and some employers would sometimes specially appoint a certain killer to complete the task. The Tang family must know about this list. Lung Shichi was inconspicuous when he first arrived, but in the process of killing Tang Hapu, he had shown too many powerful abilities, which were too eye-catching. Among the black-clothed assassins of the Donglin County branch, no one had ever possessed such strength. Therefore, the Tang family quickly confirmed that it was Lung Shichi who killed Tang and Pu. After learning the truth, Lung Shichi smiled bitterly. It turned out that he had been imagining things, but at least he had resolved one of his worries. As for the hunting order of the Tang family, he did not take it to heart. After all, he was about to leave Donglin County and return to the General Pavilion. Moreover, was there really someone who didn't care about his life and came to kill the Blood Row Pavilion's disciples? Lung Shichi continued, "I also want another piece of information. Hundreds of years ago, someone obtained the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation method in the illusory spirit secret realm. I want to know who it is." Lung Shichi had always kept this matter in mind. When he received the inheritance, he knew that the true sovereign technique, the Divine Illusion technique, had a total of 3 parts. The 5-God flowing light technique that he cultivated was one of them. The other 2 parts were obtained by Ozu of the Thousand Illusion Sword Sect and a person from hundreds of years ago. So he was very curious about who that person was. Of course, he still had a trace of fantasy in his heart that he could gather all 3 cultivation methods and restore the Divine Illusion technique. The gray-robed disciple said awkwardly, "The information from hundreds of years ago has long been sealed. Only the General Pavilion leader can read it." "Is that so?" Lung Shichi did not expect the information from the past to be sealed. If he went to Feng Shamo, it should be possible to get the information. But now he just wanted to stay away from Feng Shamo and not get involved in the internal struggle of the Blood Row Pavilion. "Forget it. I'll ask about it from other sources in the future." Lung Shichi turned around and prepared to go back to his room to tidy up. But at this moment, there was a fluctuation in his spiritual world. It was the communication method left behind by Nine Leave before he entered the illusory spirit's secret realm. When he returned to the pavilion, he did not contact Nine Leave first because he was going to see Feng Shamo. He was afraid that Feng Shamo would notice something. At this moment, Nine Leave took the initiative to contact him, but Nine Leave's voice sounded tired. "You're back so soon? Come and save me." Hey! Lung Shichi was stunned. Did he hear it wrong? Nine-Leaf asked him to save her. Although Nine-Leaf cultivation was now that of a third-rank monster, her soul power was that of a seventh-rank monster. The monster core was also a seventh-rank monster core. When they were still in the demonic Miasma Mountains, Nine-Leaf was only a second-rank monster, but she could control more than a dozen third-rank monsters at the same time for several days. Now, not to mention Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators, even Spirit Aperture Realm cultivators might not be her opponent. Only an expert in the Gang Spirit Realm, like Feng Shamo, could make her afraid. Now Nine-Leaf asked Lung Shichi to save her. Could it be that she had provoked a Spirit Gang Realm Master? Lung Shichi felt a headache coming. Before entering the illusory Spirit Secret Realm, he was a little worried about Nine-Leaf running around by herself. Now she had really caused trouble. However, Lung Shichi was stunned again. Although Nine-Leaf's words were asking for help, there was no sense of crisis in her tone at all. Instead, she sounded a little happy. Lung Shichi was skeptical. He contacted Nine-Leaf through the illusory spirit world. Senior Nine-Leaf, where are you? How would I know where this is? I'm being chased. Anyway, I'm not far from you. Hurry up and follow the mark to save me. Nine-Leaf said so, as if saying I've eaten was as easy as saying. The corner of Lung Shichi's eyes couldn't help twitching. He didn't go back to pack up. Anyway, there was nothing precious, so he hurried out. After leaving the pavilion, he followed the mark and went all the way to the west. He passed through the Eanwind Ridge and came to a deep mountain forest. He could sense that Nine-Leaf was in this forest. He immediately opened his supercilious eyes and saw Nine-Leaf's aura. However, in addition to her, there were 3 auras at the middle stage of Spirit Pulse Realm following closely behind. She was really being chased. Lung Shichi didn't dare to delay and rushed over. Although there were 3 spirit cultivators at the middle stage of Spirit Pulse Realm on the opposite side, the spiritual power in their bodies was almost exhausted. Lung Shichi still had some confidence in stalling them. On the other side, 3 spirit cultivators in fiery red clothes were chasing after Nine-Leaf with resentment. They were all disciples of the second-rate sect, Extreme Volcano Manor. Not long ago, they had also sent some people to the illusory spirit secret realm. 1/3 of the experts in the villa were not there. This was not a big deal, but one day they suddenly found that a demon beast had sneaked into their treasure house. When they found out, most of the treasures inside had been eaten by the demon beast. Chapter 273. Extreme Volcano Manor was a second-rate force in Donglin County. Furthermore, it was considered one of the leading second-rate forces. Since the establishment of the sect, there had never been something that made them feel so humiliated, because that demonic beast was merely a rank 3 demonic beast. A tiny 3rd-tier demonic beast had actually sneaked into their treasure trove without anyone noticing. Only after swallowing more than half of the treasures were discovered. To the people of Extreme Volcano Manor, this was not only a loss of a large amount of resources, but also a lifetime of humiliation. If this matter were to spread, they would probably be laughed at by the other spirit cultivator sections. This rank 3 demonic beast was naturally Nine-Leaf. Numerous disciples of Extreme Volcano Manor immediately surrounded and attacked, but the result was that they were all defeated by Nine-Leaf. Spirit Pulse Realm spirit cultivators were actually as weak as livestock in front of her, allowing her to slaughter them. Only Spirit Aperture Realm spirit cultivators could barely withstand a few moves. In the end, it was Extreme Volcano Manor's Manor Lord Zhu Huarong and Great Elder who personally took action to heavily injure Nine-Leaf. But in the end, she still managed to escape. This escape lasted for a few days. In the beginning, Zhu Huarong and Great Elder personally came to chase after her, but it was also at that time that the news of the collapse of the illusory spirit secret realm spread. The 10 spirit pulse realm disciples of Extreme Volcano Manor who entered the secret realm were actually all annihilated. When this matter came out, Zhu Huarong and Great Elder immediately felt that something was amiss. Helpless, they could only return to the sect to deal with the troublesome matters. However, they still sent many disciples to continue chasing after Nine Leave. But how could it be so easy to chase after Nine Leave? Nine Leave was originally proficient in illusory body techniques. Back then, she could even deceive Nanmin Yun and Xieping Yu, two Sky Origin Realm experts. Confusing those disciples of extreme Volcano Manor was naturally not a problem. After she used the illusory body technique again and again, the people chasing after her became fewer and fewer. Until now, there were only 3 Spirit Pulse Realm disciples left. The reason why these 3 people had the guts to continue chasing Nine Leave was because they discovered that Nine Leave was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Therefore, the 3 of them became more and more fervent. As long as they could kill this demonic beast with their own hands, they would definitely receive a huge reward from the sect. At this moment, Nine Leave was clearly a large amount of resources in their eyes. They already saw that Nine Leave's speed was slowing down, getting slower and slower. The demonic beast had stopped. The demonic beast was already exhausted. The eyes of the 3 of them were filled with excitement. They threw out a punch at the same time. Every punch was accompanied by waves of fire. It looked very powerful. However, at this moment, over 100 blue frost sword energies suddenly descended from the sky. The icy cold air instantly extinguished the wave of fire, turning the surroundings into a land of winter. The 3 of them immediately tried to block the attacks in a flurry. However, they still couldn't avoid being hit by a few of the sword chi. Their bodies were all covered in ice shards. There were also frost sword chi freezing their meridians in their bodies. "Who is it?" The 3 people from the Extreme Fire Manor immediately exclaimed. "We are disciples of the Extreme Fire Manor. We are under orders to hunt down the demon. Please don't interfere." But in the blink of an eye, dozens of figures in ferocious-looking demonic armors appeared from all directions. At the same time, dozens of dark green sword beams pierced towards them from all directions. The 3 of them were shocked. Just as they were about to dodge with all their might, a purple light flashed through Nine Leave's eyes. Their bodies instantly stiffened, and they were unable to move at all. Chi chi chi. Streaks of sword scars appeared all over the bodies of the 3 men. Immediately, 2 of them fell to the ground, no longer making any sound. Only the last person had layers of flames surging around him. He was seriously injured, but not dead. He stared in shock at the devil-like man who had appeared in front of him out of nowhere. He stuttered as if he wanted to say something, but the man thrust out his sword. The sword was like a long river, easily tearing apart the flames in front of him. He said in shock, "Level 5 spiritual weapon." However, in the next moment, his head left his body with this expression. Then, 3 faint soul powers floated out and were absorbed by Lung Shichi. The souls of 3 middle-stage Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators allowed Lung Shichi's spiritual power and physical strength to steadily increase. Although the 3 of them were all middle-stage Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators, their spiritual power was about to be exhausted. Under Lung Shichi's sneak attack and Nine Leave's control, they were easily killed. Lung Shichi put away his sword and said, "Senior Nine Leave, are you okay?" Nine Leave, who was covered in injuries, shook his head and smiled. "What can happen to me? You came quickly. I haven't seen you for a few days, but your strength has improved a lot." Lung Shichi saw Nine Leave's terrible injuries. Almost all of them were fire wounds, but Nine Leave himself did not feel anything. He said, "Senior Nine Leave, you flatter me. Maybe there will be others chasing after us. Let's leave here first." "Okay, my main body is almost exhausted. I will enter your spiritual space first." Nine Leave's soul body went directly into Lung Shichi's spiritual illusion world. As soon as Nine Leave came to the spiritual illusion world, he said in surprise, "Why is this place so damaged? What danger did you encounter in that illusory spirit secret realm? Even after using the power I left for you, you still suffered such serious injuries." Lung Shichi removed the demonic beast blood pattern armor and put Nine Leave's body into the system space. Then he skillfully picked up the three people's mustard seed bags and dealt with the corpses. This set of actions was as smooth as flowing water. As he did, he answered, "It's a long story. A lot of illusory beasts suddenly appeared in that secret realm. Now, the entire secret realm has collapsed. I escaped with great difficulty." The secret realm collapsed? Even Nine Leaf could not help but be surprised when he heard this. Under normal circumstances, secret realms will not suddenly collapse. Even if they are about to return to nothingness, they will slowly weaken and shrink before finally collapsing completely. I'm afraid there's something else. Oh, no wonder those two old guys didn't chase after me personally. It turns out that their backyard is on fire. When Lung Shichi heard this, he was also curious about what Nine Leaf had done to be chased so miserably. Thus, he asked Senior Nine Leaf, "Those three people said they were from Extreme Fire Manor. How dare they chase after you?" "Originally, I was just strolling around nearby. But one day, I suddenly sensed the aura of something good. I followed the aura and found Extreme Fire Manor. Later, I sneaked into their treasury, but that thing was sealed in a secret room. Even I couldn't open it. So, I simply stayed there and ate some things when I was free to recover some of my cultivation." At this point, Lung Shichi completely understood that Nine Leaf had caused havoc in Extreme Fire Manor's treasury. It would be strange if they did not chase after him. Lung Shichi said, "Senior Nine Leaf, I'm just about to return to the Blood Garment Pavilion's General Pavilion in Mukon County. As long as I leave Donglin County, the people from Extreme Fire Manor will not be a threat." "You're going back to the General Pavilion?" "There are many unity of heaven and man and sky origin powerhouses there." Nine Leaf did not seem very happy to hear this. Lung Shichi knew that Nine Leaf was afraid of the Blood Garment Pavilion's powerhouses, but he had to go back. Thus, he explained, "Yes, I'm going back to become a Blood Garment assassin." "Forget it. While I'm about to reach the Blood Garment Pavilion, I'll just sleep for a while. Recently, I've swallowed many rare treasures. My cultivation can also improve. By the way, during this time, you have to find a way to help me recover my physical body. Consider it my condition for lending you my power." "Of course." Chapter 274. Blood-Clothed Pavilion, Mukon Prefecture. Lung Shichi finally returned here after half a year. Whether it was Lung Shichi's cultivation or strength, there was a huge change compared to when he left. During this period, he was first caught in the power struggle in Shenyang City and was tricked by Chu Xinran. Later, he participated in the dispute of Bowan's tomb and was possessed by the devil spirit and almost lost his life. In order to break through to the spiritual pulse realm, he went to the demonic Miasma Mountains and fell into the chess game of the two top forces, Imperial Beast Abode and Blood Beast Sect. He met Nine Leaf by accident and finally broke through to the spiritual pulse realm with Nine Leaf's help. Not long ago, he entered the illusory spirit secret realm. Although he only stayed there for 2 or 3 days, it was really a narrow escape. Now Lung Shichi's illusory spirit world had almost been repaired, and he could basically remember what happened in the Divine Dream Illusory Palace. He finally understood why the woman in black gauze had the centipede spell in her body. He also remembered that he had comprehended the unique skill of Ephemeral Bloom. He also knew that Meng Tianzong, who founded the Divine Dream Palace and sacrificed tens of thousands of disciples 10,000 years ago, was not dead. Such a person reappeared in the world, and he didn't know what kind of turbulence it would cause to the continent in the future. He also remembered that before they fainted, a colorful streamer had entered his body. He guessed that was the reason why he had opened the 9 spiritual pulses in an instant. However, he also had a huge question in his heart. That was, why didn't Meng Tianzong kill them? Since Meng Tianzong could tamper with everyone's memory in an instant, it was naturally easy for him to kill them. This matter was like a sharp thorn in Lung Shichi's heart, causing him to be puzzled no matter how hard he thought. However, he couldn't guess the thoughts of a powerful expert like Meng Tianzong. The only thing he needed to do now was to constantly improve his strength. Only when he was strong could he face the countless tribulations and crises in the future. After returning to the blood-clothed pavilion, Lung Shiqi didn't rush to the formless palace to find formless. Instead, he went to visit another person, Ghost Ju. He heard that Ghost Ju, the former Grand Pavilion leader of the sub-pavilion in Donglin County, was now the deacon elder in charge of the black-clothed killers. It was indeed a waste of talent to let a former ghost blood-clothed killer, former Grand Pavilion leader, and master of gang spirit realm manage the outer disciples. But when Lung Shiqi saw Ghost Art, he was leisurely lying on a recliner, holding a slightly old book and reading it with great interest. Lung Shiqi bowed and said, "This disciple greets the Grand Pavilion leader." Ghost Ju was also surprised by Lung Shiqi's arrival. When he discovered that Lung Shiqi's cultivation was actually at the Spirit Pulse realm, he immediately sat up straight. His slightly turbid eyes were filled with surprise. He nodded in appreciation and said, "You've changed a lot, kid. You've come back to be promoted to a blood-clothed assassin, right? But I'm no longer the Grand Pavilion leader. You can call me Elder. In my heart, you will always be the Grand Pavilion Lord." Ghost Ju laughed. "You've learned how to flatter me. You must have something you want to ask me." Lung Shiqi did not hide it and said, "Sure enough, nothing can escape the Grand Pavilion leader's eyes. I'm in a good mood today. What do you want to know?" Ghost Ju lay back on the recliner and said. Lung Shiqi looked serious and asked, "Grand Pavilion leader, I want to know the relationship between the senior members of the sect." Ghost Ju revealed an expression of sure enough and said, "You've already noticed that the blood-clothed pavilion is not stable internally." His expression was a little heavy. In fact, there was no deputy pavilion leader position in the blood-clothed pavilion before. The current pavilion leader, Hateful Blade, is a cultivation maniac. He spends more than 80% of his time in closed-door cultivation and has no time to manage the sect. That's why there is a deputy pavilion leader. But it also leads to the division of power. Although the deputy pavilion leader's cultivation is not as good as the pavilion leader's, he has been in charge of the affairs of the pavilion for many years and has a high prestige. There are even many people who only know the deputy pavilion leader, but not the pavilion leader. Hearing this, Lung Shiqi thought of the phrase, "Great achievements overshadow the pavilion leader." So gradually, the pavilion was divided into two factions. One faction supported the pavilion leader, while the other supported the deputy pavilion leader. For so many years, these two factions have been in conflict, but there's only one thing that everyone has reached a consensus on. That is the Blood Fog Island plan. Speaking of this, Guiju looked at Lung Shiqi meaningfully and continued, "But speaking of which, the Vice Pavilion Lord never had any thoughts of seizing the position because he knew he wasn't the Pavilion Lord's match. Now that no one can shake the Pavilion Leader and Deputy Pavilion Leader's position, many people have placed their hopes on the next generation. In other words, the next Pavilion Leader candidate." Hearing these words, Lung Shiqi immediately thought of Feng Shamo. He was the Pavilion Leader's direct disciple and was now in charge of a branch of the pavilion. He must be one of the Pavilion Leader candidates. Ghost Ju said, "You should have guessed that Feng Shamo is one of the candidates for the next Pavilion Leader. Other than him, there are two others. One is the leader of the 9 Underworld Blood Cloak Assassins, Hua Luwei. The other one is your master, Wu Xiang." "What?" Lung Shiqi was shocked. He had never thought that his master, who seemed a little unreliable, would be a candidate for the next Pavilion Leader. At this time, he recalled that in the Bloodkill Hall, Wu Xiang dared to be so arrogant in front of the Pavilion Leader. It turned out that he did have the qualifications to be arrogant. Although Feng Shamo is still young and his cultivation is not as good as Hua Luiwen and Wu Xiang's, he wins in terms of status. He is the rightful candidate, and many of the older factions in the pavilion support him. Hua Luiwen and Wu Xiang are the outstanding disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion and are known as the Blood Cloak Duo. Whether it is in terms of cultivation strength or contributions, they are strong contenders for the next Pavilion Leader position. However, both of them had very unique personalities. Hua Luiyue is a bit like the pavilion leader, who is obsessed with cultivation and doesn't like power struggles. Wu Xiang is quite enthusiastic, but his unreliable personality makes it difficult for him to convince the others. In general, these three people have their own strengths and weaknesses and are all likely to succeed the pavilion leader position in the future. If I have to say, the most likely candidates are Feng Shamo and Wu Xiang. Lung Shiqi listened carefully and thought to himself. Suddenly, he realized a very awkward thing. That was, which faction did he belong to? His identity was Wu Xiang's disciple, but at the same time, he was also under Feng Shamo's command. He became Wu Xiang's disciple and went to the Donglin County Pavilion branch to become Feng Shamo's subordinate. All of this seemed very coincidental, but was it really just a coincidence? Ghost Ju said, "You are in a very bad situation now. Your identity as the winner of Blood Fog Island is already eye-catching enough. Now you're deeply involved in the battle between Feng Shamo and Wu Xiang. Every choice and decision you make will cause unimaginable changes. So you have to be careful, very careful." Chapter 275. Lung Shiqi only found out after coming back that he had been caught in an invisible storm. If he wasn't careful, he would be crushed. However, you don't have to worry too much. Ghost Ju's tone became relaxed again. Don't forget, what is the prerequisite for the next pavilion master position? If the current pavilion master doesn't step down, he still has more than 100 years to live. As long as you don't interact with too many people, there won't be any trouble in the short term. Lung Shiqi clasped his hands. Disciple thanks head pavilion master for pointing me out. It's nothing. Wu Xiang will tell you about this sooner or later. However, if it comes from his mouth, it will be more biased towards him. All right, if you have nothing else, you can go back. I still have to read more books. This Netherblood cloak assassin who had once dominated a region actually said he wanted to read more books. This sounded a bit strange to Lung Shiqi's ears. However, he hesitated and didn't leave. Is there anything else? Disciple wants to ask about the other three people. When he, Delta, Origi, Yushu, and Xiongming left the Blood Mist Island, the other three all became disciples of Sky Origin Realm cultivators. What about himself? He was sent to the Donglin County branch in less than 2 days. He had been running around the entire time and didn't know anything about the other three. He was now very curious about the cultivation levels of those three people, especially Delta Origi. Ghost Ju's eyes flashed with joy when he thought of the other three. I have to say, the four of you are all rare geniuses. Yushu and Xiongming are already at the peak of the spirit transformation realm and have been preparing to break through to the spirit pulse realm. They are only 14 or 15 years old. I believe they can break through in 2 or 3 years. As for Delta Origi, Ghost Ju paused for a moment. She broke through more than a month ago. Hearing this, Lung Shiqi couldn't help but be startled. More than a month ago, Lung Shiqi had just returned from the demonic Miasma mountain range. This meant that Delta Origi had broken through a bit later than him. Others didn't know, but how could Lung Shiqi not know how he broke through? He risked his life to enter the demonic Miasma mountain range to kill demon beasts and refine their blood. That was how he quickly reached the peak of the spirit transformation realm. Later, he had to fuse 3 techniques in the demonic spirit spring to break through to the spirit pulse realm. It could be said that he had rised his life. However, Delta Origi also broke through. He couldn't help but ask, has Gu-san left the general pavilion recently? She's to cultivate to the end, to cultivate to the spirits. S a spirit, T test to S to this to tus to zest, T's master, S to his disciple understands. Disciple won't disturb the head pavilion leader's rest and will take his leave. Gue Ju casually waved his hand. Go. However, after Lung Shiqi left, Gue Ju stood up. He sighed deeply and muttered, 2 14-year-old spirit pulse realm cultivators, and 2 more who broke through before the age of 18. These 4 people might really be able to do it. Lung Shiqi went to Wu Xiang Palace with heavy thoughts. Unexpectedly, Wu Xiang wasn't there, and neither was Sulwan. He went directly to the Blood Garment Hall of the Blood Garment Pavilion. That was where the Blood Garment Assassins gathered, and where one could become a Blood Garment Assassin. A moment later, he walked into the Blood Garment Hall and saw Blood Garment Assassins everywhere. These people were all spirit cultivators of the Sky Realm. After wandering around outside, Lung Shiqi felt more and more that the Blood Garment Pavilion was worthy of being called a peak power. Without mentioning anything else, just the hundreds of Blood Garment Assassins in the hall were enough to easily destroy a second-rate power. Seeing Lung Shiqi, the black-clothed assassin, walk in, some people looked at him. However, when they sensed his cultivation, they knew what he was here for. At this time, a gray-clothed disciple quickly walked over and asked, "Sir, are you here to become a Blood Garment Assassin? Please follow me. In, lead the way." The gray-clothed disciple brought Lung Shiqi to a side hall on the left side of the hall. After a simple test to confirm Lung Shiqi's cultivation, he handed over another 1,000 blood drops. The gray-clothed disciple gave him a new identity token and gave him 2 sets of black striped blood garment and a monthly salary. A black striped blood garment assassin's monthly salary was a 3rd transformation spirit pill and 100 spirit stones. Just the 3rd transformation spirit pill alone was worth hundreds of spirit stones. The difference between him and a black-clothed assassin was not small at all. After handing over everything, the gray-clothed disciple said, "Sir, after becoming a Blood Garment Assassin, you can have a unique code name and mask. May I ask what your code name is?" Code name? Lung Shiqi heard this and laughed in his heart. His name itself was a code name. He could continue to use this code name. Lung Shiqi. The gray-clothed disciple was stunned. He knew that this was Lung Shiqi's real name through the identity token, which meant that he did not have a code name. However, the gray-clothed disciple immediately said, "Sir, please follow me to choose a mask." Then, he followed the gray-clothed disciple to another room. As soon as he entered the room, Lung Shiqi saw a dazzling array of masks, and each mask was different. A short, bald old man was playing with a mask, his face full of satisfaction. The gray-clothed disciple bowed and said, "Master Feng, there's a new Blood Garment Assassin who wants to choose a mask. And I know, choose whatever you want." This Master Feng was still immersed in his own world and did not want to pay attention to Lung Shiqi. Lung Shiqi did not care. He casually strolled around the room. There were many masks on the walls and tables in the room. These masks were almost all fierce. He looked around and was not very satisfied. At this time, he happened to see the mask in Master Feng's hand. There was no obvious pattern on it, only a gray vortex. The gray vortex was like a piece of chaos that had not yet opened. It destroyed everything, gave birth to everything, and could also accommodate everything. Lung Shiqi had a feeling in his heart. He seemed to have seen the path that spirit cultivators would take in the future. Whether it was cultivation methods or spirit techniques, he was now walking the path of fusion. Fusion of new cultivation methods and spirit techniques. Wasn't it just destroying the original and then regenerating it? This mask was very suitable for him. He walked over and asked, "Can you give me this mask?" And Master Feng came back to his senses and said with some surprise, "You want this? Haha, you have good taste, take it." Lung Shiqi did not expect the other party to give it to him so easily. He thought that Master Feng liked this mask very much and would not be willing to give it to him. Master Feng said, "This mask can find an owner who appreciates it. It can be said that it belongs to someone." Lung Shiqi turned his back and put on a new mask. When this mask was on his face, there was a cool feeling coming from it. It was quite comfortable to feel it carefully. What was even more strange was that the mask completely covered the entire face, but his breathing was very smooth and his vision was not affected at all. At this time, he discovered that this mask was actually a level 3 spirit weapon. Then Lung Shiqi put on the blood red robe. At this moment, he finally became a Blood Garment Assassin of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Chapter 276. In the end, Lung Shiqi left the Bloodcloth Palace with a token and walked towards the Bloodbook Palace. After becoming a Bloodcloth assassin, he had another benefit, which was that he could choose any level 4 spiritual skill. He could choose any level 4 spiritual skill that was worth thousands of spirit stones in the outside world. This was the deep foundation of the Bloodcloth Pavilion. Speaking of spiritual skills, Lung Shiqi carefully thought about which spiritual skill to choose on the way. At present, he didn't lack spiritual skills in sword, fist, or palm, and was quite rich in spiritual skills, so he planned to choose a finger technique, a leg technique, or some special spiritual skills. With the token, Lung Shiqi came to the Bloodbook Palace again, but this time he came to the second floor of the Bloodbook Palace. The second floor was filled with rank 4 cultivation methods and spiritual skills, but here, there were hundreds of cultivation methods and spiritual skills. These extremely precious resources were also divided into areas. Lung Shiqi directly targeted the finger techniques, leg techniques, and special spiritual skills. He looked at the spiritual skills placed on the shelves one by one and thought it was a pity. If these spiritual skills were real, he would be rich. Because there wasn't much time, Lung Shiqi didn't dare to delay. He looked through almost all the spiritual skills in the 3 areas and chose 3 spiritual skills. They were Bloodline Finger, Thunderstorm Kick, and Wind Chant Escape. Bloodline Finger used the blood chi of the cultivator as the foundation, condensing the power of blood chi and spiritual power to the extreme. It was a finger technique with strong penetrating power. Thunderstorm Kick was a very fierce leg technique. When cultivated to the extreme, it could even trigger a trace of thunderstorm power. It was very powerful. As for the Wind Chant Escape technique, it was a type of escape technique mainly used for escaping. One had strong penetrating power, one had strong explosive power, and one was good at escaping. Lung Shiqi wanted all of them, but he could only choose one of the 3. He held the 3 spiritual skills and fell into deep thought. After a while, he put the other 2 spiritual skills back. He chose Bloodline Finger. The 3 spiritual techniques that he had chosen were the ones that he had found most suitable for himself in each area. Therefore, he was considering which of the 3 was the most suitable for him. Lung Shiqi first ruled out Thunderstorm Kick. Although this spiritual skill had strong explosive power, he also bought Violent Lion Angry Forest Fist not long ago. The 2 were actually somewhat similar. It was just that one was a fist technique and the other was a leg technique. Moreover, whether it was the Formation Breaking Cross Spear or Earth Fiend Demon Claw, they were both spiritual skills with explosive power, so Thunderstorm Kick didn't seem that important. Then he made a decision with the remaining 2 spiritual skills. Wind Chant Escape was a good escape technique. It was good for chasing and escaping. Ghost, 100 Ghost Night, Ghost Walk, and the Holy Silver Deer's Beast Origin Battle Rune that could increase his speed. The only blood was the Spirit's spiritual skill. It was a spiritual skill. Spirit. The penetrative power of Bloodline Finger was something Lung Shiqi didn't have now, and the more blood the practitioner of this spiritual skill had, the more powerful it would be. Lung Shiqi's body was far stronger than ordinary people, and his blood was very strong. So after careful consideration, he chose Bloodline Finger. Soon after, he walked out of the Bloodbook Palace with this spiritual skill, but an unexpected person appeared in front of the Bloodbook Palace. That person was Wu Xiang. Lung Shiqi's clothes, mask, and body shape had changed a lot, but he was still recognized by Wu Xiang at a glance. Wu Xiang clapped his hands and shouted, "You didn't tell me you were coming back." Lung Shiqi opened his mouth. He couldn't contact Wu Xiang in the Donglin County branch, and he couldn't find him when he went to Wu Xiang's palace. But before Lung Shiqi could explain, he was dragged away by Wu Xiang. Lung Shiqi's arm was grabbed by Wu Xiang, and he couldn't resist at all. He was dragged all the way to Wu Xiang's palace, just like when he came out of the Blood Kill Hall half a year ago. At this moment, Wu Xiang was walking around Lung Shiqi in circles, muttering a few words from time to time. Lung Shiqi's mouth twitched a few times. He felt like he was a circus monkey being watched. Wu Xiang stood still and said, "I was just saying it casually, but you really broke through to the spirit pulse realm in a year." Hearing this, Lung Shiqi almost coughed up blood. "You were just saying it casually?" When he was in the branch, even if Feng Shamo didn't ask him to, he would have to go to the demonic Miasma mountain range to complete Wu Xiang's mission. In order to break through to the spirit pulse realm, he went through several life and death situations, and in the end, this was what he got. He took a deep breath and asked, "What if I don't break through to the spirit pulse realm in a year?" "What?" Wu Xiang tilted his head. "If you don't break through, then don't break through. If 1 year isn't enough, then 2 years. If 2 years isn't enough, then 3 years. In any case, as long as you can break through in 10 years, I can accept it." Lung Shiqi felt like he had suffered heavy internal injuries. So in his master's heart, he had given him 10 years. Lung Shiqi was speechless, but he suddenly thought of something. He asked tentatively, "Then, Master, the great opportunity you talked about, oh, cough, cough." Wu Xiang sat down and coughed dryly. Lung Shiqi immediately had a bad feeling. Wu Xiang said, "Don't worry, I'll arrange it for you. Do you think I'll lie to you?" Lung Shiqi felt that it was very possible, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. "Oh," Wu Xiang suddenly exclaimed, as if he had thought of something. He said, "Since you're back, and your back is a blood cloak assassin, Delta Orgi also broke through to the spirit pulse realm not long ago. It seems that you could do that thing now. Don't run around in the next few days. I'll go ask for a fortune for you." Before Wu Xiang's voice even faded, his figure had already disappeared. Lung Shiqi's eyes widened. He couldn't even catch a glimpse of Wu Xiang's figure. It was hard to imagine how fast Wu Xiang was. However, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wu Xiang left just like that, leaving him here again. "Sai, it's time to rest for a while. The illusion world hasn't been completely repaired yet. I can also try to merge the violent lion raging forest fist with the tiger wave treading fist. Let's see if there's a chance to break through to the second level of the spirit pulse realm." It had been more than 2 months since he stepped into the first level of the spirit pulse realm. During this time, he didn't have much time to cultivate. However, he often battled, so his spiritual energy grew quickly. At the same time, he had also refined a few third transformation spirit pills. They were very effective for him at the first level of the spirit pulse realm. Now, his spiritual energy was quite abundant. Moreover, he had already opened up 10 spirit pulses. As long as he continued to accumulate spiritual energy, he could easily break through to the second level of the spirit pulse realm. Thinking of this, Lung Shiqi returned to his own courtyard, the courtyard where he had only stayed for 2 nights. However, before he reached the courtyard, a servant disciple called out to him, "Master Lung, there's someone outside who wants to see you." Lung Shiqi was a little surprised. Who would come to see him? When he arrived outside the Wuxiang Palace, he saw a petite girl dressed in black standing there. However, her aura was that of the spirit pulse realm. She was Delta Orgi. Chapter 277. When Lung Shiqi saw Delta Orgi again after more than half a year, there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. It would be a lie to say that he didn't miss Delta Orgi these days, but he missed the feeling of mutual trust between him and Delta Orgi. Now that they met, he suddenly couldn't speak. No, both of them were wearing masks, so it couldn't be considered a real meeting. Delta Orgi was stunned when he saw Lung Shiqi come out. He was shocked by Lung Shiqi's size. Originally, Lung Shiqi was only a little taller than Delta Orgi, but now he was more than a head taller. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Delta Orgi's familiar voice came. Lung Shiqi smiled gently and made a pleased gesture. Lung Shiqi brought Delta Orgi to his small courtyard, which was still taken care of while he was away. The entire small courtyard was decorated very delicately. Although the place was not big, it was very comfortable. "Greetings, Master." 2 servant disciples, Ah Zhe and Ah Jin, who took care of the small courtyard, came up to greet him. "Well, go ahead. Lung Shichi greeted them and walked into the room with Delta Orgi. As soon as he entered the room, Delta Orgi immediately asked, "When did you break through?" Lung Shichi smiled in his heart. Delta Orgi was still so strong. About 2 months ago. Since he broke through, it took him a month to rush back to the Donglin County branch from the demon-suppressing town. Then, it took him nearly a month to wait for the illusory spirit's secret realm to open. It took him another 10 days to come from Donglin County to the General Pavilion. Counting the days, it was almost 3 months. Delta Orgi murmured, "You're still earlier than me." Lung Shichi knew that the Delta Orgi would say this, but before he could say anything, the Delta Orgi spoke again. "I heard that you went to the Donglin County branch. Not bad. You must have seen a lot of interesting things." Delta Orgi's tone contained a hint of yearning. Lung Shichi suddenly remembered that Delta Orgi had been cultivating in the Blood Cloak Pavilion ever since they came out of the Blood Fog Island. She would definitely know how big this world was and how exciting it was through reading the books. However, she was like a canary in a cage. Although she had plenty of resources and guidance from Sky Origin Stage cultivators, she had no freedom at all, including the time he spent on the Blood Fog Island. Gu-san should have not left for almost 3 years. Lung Shichi's heart skipped a beat. Thinking about it, it was actually a good thing that he was transferred to the Donglin County branch. So he said, "I did learn a lot, but the outside world is also full of dangers. If you're not careful, you'll be smashed to pieces. Aren't you doing well? You even broke through to the spiritual pulse stage earlier than me." Delta Orgi's words sounded strange. Lung Shichi touched his nose. Why did they go back to the topic? Delta Orgi said, "So I'm curious. What have you experienced?" Lung Shichi organized his words and replied, "Actually, it's nothing. After I arrived at the Donglin County branch, I took a task." Next, Lung Shichi roughly told her what he had experienced. He hit a few great dangers and only said that he survived because of luck. He did not tell the complete truth about Nine Leaf. He only said that she was a strange demon beast who had gained intelligence in advance. After all, Nine Leaf's existence was too shocking. Without Nine Leaf's permission, he did not dare to reveal Nine Leaf's true identity. Even so, Delta Orgi's emotions fluctuated. She was silent for a while before sighing slightly. "You've experienced life and death several times outside. It's natural for you to have such cultivation." Delta Orgi was a very shrewd person. Even though Lung Shichi deliberately hid some things, she could vaguely guess. Lung Shichi changed the topic and asked, "Then why don't you go out and do a few tasks?" "It's because of my master, Bone Demon." Delta Orgi actually had a hint of complaint when she mentioned Bone Demon. "He made me unable to finish my apprenticeship before I reached the spiritual pulse stage. I finally broke through to the spiritual pulse stage a month ago, but he insisted that I practice several cultivation methods and spiritual techniques. It was not until these 2 days that I finally finished my apprenticeship. Although my cultivation is at the spiritual pulse stage, my blood droplets are empty. I can't be promoted to the blood-clothed assassin. I originally planned to take missions to accumulate blood droplets and go out for a walk. I just happened to hear Master mention that you're back, so I came to take a look." Hearing this, Lung Shichi secretly thought that Delta Orgi was facing the same awkward situation as him. He said, "Your current identity is still a black-clothed assassin. You can only take 1 or 2-star missions. These missions can at most give you between 50 to 60 blood droplets. If that's the case, you'll have to do at least 10 to 20 missions to be promoted to the blood-clothed assassin." Delta Orgi nodded and said, "I know. That's why I came to find you." Lung Shichi paused for a moment. Then he thought of a possibility. Sure enough, Delta Orgi said, "You're now a blood-clothed assassin. You can take 3 or 4-star missions. You can take missions and we'll finish them together. Then you can split the blood droplets with me. This way, it'll be much faster." Lung Shichi had to admit that this was indeed a good idea. In other words, it was a bit like taking a smurf to do missions. The only difference was that this smurf was also very strong. However, Lung Shichi did not immediately agree. Instead, he looked hesitant. Gusen naturally knew what Lung Shichi was thinking. She lightly snorted and said, "You're a guy who doesn't wake up early if there are no benefits. I've cultivated a lot of spirit skills at Master's place. Among them, I can't teach you anything related to Master, but I can teach you the rest." "Deal." Lung Shichi agreed very quickly. Delta Origi. Not long after, Lung Shichi came to the blood-clothed palace again. However, Delta Origi did not come in. This was because only blood-clothed assassins could enter this place. Even Delta Origi, the direct disciple of Bone Demon, could not enter. Lung Shichi came here to take missions. He had discussed with Delta Origi that it would be best to take missions that were closer to him and had more blood droplets. He carefully looked around a few black-veined stone slabs in the corner of the Bloodkill Palace. These slabs were filled with 3- and 4-star missions. The 3-star missions were mainly targeted at Spirit Pulse early or mid-Spirit Pulse realm cultivators, while the 4-star missions were targeted at Spirit Pulse late-stage cultivators or Spirit Pulse realm cultivators with special identities. Lung Shichi did not become arrogant. He planned to take a 3-star mission to try his hand at it. He walked around twice and chose 3 or 4 suitable missions. They were all within the Muchen region and had around 200 blood droplets. Just as he was about to take a mission, another mission suddenly appeared on the black-veined stone slab. Lung Shichi's attention was drawn over. It was a 4-star mission, but the target of the mission was a spirit cultivator at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. Furthermore, it was someone who had some relationship with Lung Shichi. Mission target: abandoned disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword Sect, OZU. Chapter 278. Many people saw the mission information, but everyone who saw it was in disbelief. OZU's name was known even in Muchen County. He was the most outstanding disciple of the younger generation of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect, one of the 8 desolate weapon arts. Who would dare to issue a mission to assassinate him? This was equivalent to breaking the foundation of the next generation of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect. However, what was even more unbelievable was that the mission information actually said traitor of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect. In other words, OZU had betrayed the sect. This was even more inconceivable. For OZU, he was like the moon surrounded by stars in the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect. The sect would definitely pour a lot of resources and effort into him to nurture him. Moreover, they had heard that he had obtained the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation technique. His cultivation future was simply bright. It was even possible for him to control the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect in the future. Such a person would betray the sect? Was he crazy? Just as everyone was in a daze, Lung Shichi quickly accepted the mission. He had met OZU a few times before and knew that OZU was also at the first level of the Spirit Pulse realm. Even if he was a disciple of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect, Lung Shichi was confident that he could kill him. Moreover, the reward for this mission was extremely generous. Not only were there hundreds of spirit stones and 300 drops of blood, there was also a meridian opening pill. Of course, these were not the most important things. The most important thing was the inheritance of OZU's cultivation technique. He had another part of the Divine Illusion Spirit technique on him. If OZU was still a disciple of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect, Lung Shichi would have almost no chance of obtaining another cultivation technique. But now, OZU had actually become a traitor of the Thousand Illusionary Sword Sect. Although he did not know the reason, he could openly make a move. This mission could not only help the Delta Orgi obtain a large number of blood drops, but it was also possible to obtain another powerful cultivation technique. It could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing that Lung Shichi had accepted the mission, some of the surrounding people regretted it. This mission was not difficult, but it was already a 4-star mission. Moreover, if they could kill a peerless genius with their own hands, it would be a great honor. Unfortunately, Lung Shichi was 1 step ahead. Since the mission had been accepted, The others could only shake their heads and disperse. In the blood clothing pavilion, disputes over missions were not allowed. This was the basic rule. Lung Shichi walked out of the Bloodcloth Palace with the mission and the basic information related to the mission. At this time, Delta Orgi was still waiting outside. Seeing Lung Shichi come out, she was a little unhappy. "Why are you so slow?" "I received a special mission." Lung Shichi pretended to be mysterious. Delta Orgi asked, "Special? How many stars is this mission?" 4-star. Delta Orgi was surprised. "A 4-star mission? We are going to assassinate a spirit cultivator at the late stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. Are you that confident? Let's talk as we walk." Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi walked to the exit of the blood clothing pavilion. At the same time, he gave the information of the mission to Delta Orgi. Although this mission is listed as a 4-star mission, the target's cultivation is only at the first level of the Spirit Pulse realm, the same as you and me. He is OZU of the Thousand Illusion Sword Sect. Delta Orgi asked, "OZU? The one you mentioned before, the one who obtained the Divine Illusion Palace's inheritance technique." "OZU? That's right." Delta Orgi nodded and then looked at the information Lung Shichi gave her. This information roughly described the reason why OZU betrayed the sect and his current location. In Lung Shichi's opinion, the reason why OZU betrayed the sect was a little melodramatic. OZU actually fell in love with a demonic Tao Wish. A peerless genius from a top faction fell in love with a demonic Tao Wish. This kind of thing might be written by many storytellers, but it really happened. According to the information, OZU actually fell in love with a disciple of the Purgatory Demon sect from the 6 Paths of Demon Realm, who was ranked on the world's sect list. Although devil cultivators were not welcomed on this continent, it was not to the point where everyone wanted to beat them up. The 6 Paths of Demon Realm's Devil Tao sect was also a place that many spirit cultivators yearned for. However, the Purgatory Demon sect and the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had never been on good terms. Although they could not be said to be mortal enemies, they definitely did not have good words to say when they met. However, the leader of the younger generation of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect, OZU, actually fell in love with a disciple of the Purgatory Demon sect, and she was only an ordinary outer disciple. Originally, this matter was handled internally by the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. It was nothing more than wanting OZU to completely break off his relationship with that woman. Lung Shichi even imagined a lot of plots, but somehow it had developed to this point. Now that the news had spread like wildfire, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had lost all face. Lung Shichi guessed that the mission to assassinate OZU was most likely issued by the Thousand Illusion Sword sect themselves. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect maintained their status. On the surface, they only expelled OZU from the sect and did not send anyone to kill him. However, it was not necessarily the case in the dark. No one knew about the hidden matters between the Thousand Illusion Sword sect and OZU, or between OZU and the Devil Tao Wish. Lung Shichi only knew that OZU had become his assassination target and had escaped all the way to Muchin County. According to the information, OZU had appeared near the Southern God Peak in Muchin County 3 days ago. Delta Orgi quickly finished reading the information. She asked with some doubt, "Southern God Peak?" Lung Shichi said, "What's wrong? What's so special about this Southern God Peak?" "It's nothing. I usually like to read some miscellaneous books, so I have some impression of this Southern God Peak. It is said that every once in a while, a strange phenomenon will appear on the Southern God Peak. It is like a miracle, which is how it got its name. It is just that for so many years, no heavenly treasures have appeared there, so people are used to it. However, most people who come to Muchin County for the first time will go to see it." Lung Shichi nodded gently and secretly glanced at Delta Orgi. She had never left the blood clothing pavilion, but she knew so much about the outside world. It could be seen how much she yearned for the outside world. He said, "OZU appeared there 3 days ago, and the Southern God Peak is not close. Even if we travel day and night, it will take 3 or 4 days to reach it. As a result, We have been delayed for 7 or 8 days. I don't even know where OZU went. Delta Orgi also felt that it was a bit tricky. Then what should we do? Let's go to Nantua City near the southern God Peak first. There will be an intelligence stronghold of the sect there. Let's go there and get the latest information first. Okay, you have experience. I'll listen to you. Hearing this, Lung Shichi couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Since he became an assassin, he had completed 1.5 missions at most. He really didn't have much experience. Chapter 279. 3 days later, an old man with a rather strong body brought a young girl with an ordinary face and slightly dark skin to Nanda City. The old man was holding a map and looking at it seriously, as if he was looking for something. The young girl's bright eyes looked around, full of curiosity. These two people were Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi in disguise. Because Delta Orgi was still young, in order not to attract attention, she used a breath-concealing technique to hide her cultivation to the peak of the pure spirit realm. Lung Shichi put away the map and looked at Delta Orgi beside him, revealing a kind smile, and said, "Little Goo, come this way with Grandpa." Delta Orgi heard this and immediately glared at Lung Shichi, then held Lung Shichi's waist and said, "Grandpa, you're old. I'll help you walk." However, her nails had already sunk deep into Lung Shichi's back. Even though Lung Shichi's body was not weak, he still grimaced in pain. Delta Orgi sneered and let go of her hand. "What are you doing?" Lung Shichi bit his gums and said, "We have to hide our identities." Delta Orgi said innocently, "We have to hide our identities. Want to be more realistic if I help you?" Okay, real. Lung Shichi nodded helplessly, then brought Delta Orgi to a dilapidated restaurant in a remote part of the city. This was the Blood Garment Pavilion's intelligence base in Nanda City. After a secret signal, a person dressed as a manservant welcomed them in. After passing through 2 secret doors, the manservant bowed and said, "This humble one, Dai Bin, greets the 2 esteemed envoys." Lung Shichi said straightforwardly, "I want the latest information on OZU. So the 2 esteemed envoys are here for OZU. This humble one has already sorted out the information. This is the latest information that was sorted out this morning. Please take a look." Dai Bin picked up the 2 pieces of information on the table. This is the information on OZU's cultivation method and spirit technique, and the other is the information on his whereabouts. Very good. Lung Shichi took the report. "How much?" Dai Bin chuckled. "Envoy, you really understand me. These 2 pieces of information only cost 2 spirit stones." Lung Shichi felt that it was a little expensive, but thinking that OZU's identity was extraordinary, it was not easy to have such detailed information about him. Thus, he took out 2 spirit stones without hesitation. Dai Bin took the spirit stones happily and said, "Emissary, I have some information to give you." "Oh, I'm all ears." Actually, the 2 emissaries are not the only ones who want OZU's life. Lung Shichi was a little puzzled. In Mukon County, there are still people who dare to steal our Blood Garment Pavilion's business. Although the Blood Garment Pavilion was the most powerful assassin force in the entire Thunderfire dynasty, the dynasty was vast and had abundant resources. Even the Blood Garment Pavilion could not take over such a large place. Therefore, there were also some small and medium-sized assassin forces in the Thunderfire dynasty, but they could only drink the leftover soup of the Blood Garment Pavilion. If OZU appeared in other prefectures, it was possible that another assassin force was involved. However, this was Mukon County. It was where the Blood Garment Pavilion's main pavilion was located. Which blind assassin force would dare to interfere? Dai Bin replied, "That's not the case. It's mainly because some rogue cultivators covet OZU's cultivation method, spirit technique, and cultivation resources. In addition, there are also a few small forces that are secretly inquiring about OZU." Lung Shichi nodded in understanding. Now, the news of OZU's betrayal had spread. Without the powerful back mountain of the 1,000 Illusionary Sword sect, His cultivation was only at the first level of the spirit vein realm, but he had many high-level cultivation methods and spirit techniques. Naturally, he would attract many wolves. This information is very useful. Goodbye. Lung Shiqi felt that the 2 spirit stones were worth it. If he deliberately lowered the price, he would definitely be able to do so. However, he would not be able to get the information after that. Dai Bin smiled and said, "Welcome again, esteemed envoy." After leaving the small restaurant, Delta Orgi said, "It seems that we need to move faster." You're right. Although those rogue cultivators and small forces do not have detailed information, they might be able to find OZU with their numbers. By the way, why are only rogue cultivators and small forces secretly chasing after OZU? Why don't those large forces make a move? Delta Orgi had such a question in her heart. Lung Shiqi explained, "Of course they want to make a move. However, it's easy to determine the cultivation methods and spirit techniques of those large sect's disciples. Although OZU has been expelled from the sect by the 1,000 Illusionary Sword sect, if a certain force openly assassinated OZU, it would still be equivalent to slapping the 1,000 Illusionary Sword sect's face. Of course, another important reason is that this is Mukon County. The large forces of the other provinces and counties do not dare to ignore the Blood Robe Pavilion and easily set foot here. And those small forces that came to kill OZU are probably the local forces of Mukon County." Delta Orgi had never left the Blood Robe Pavilion, so she was not very clear about some of the unspoken rules between the various forces. He muttered, "So that's how it is." Then, the 2 of them walked into an alley and began to check on OZU's information. Lung Shiqi was very surprised. OZU was still in the Southern Divine Peak. In other words, OZU had been in the Southern Divine Peak for 7 or 8 days. What was a fugitive like him doing here instead of running away? Doesn't he know that someone will come to kill him? No. Lung Shiqi quickly rejected this idea. In the illusory spirit's secret realm, he had been in close contact with OZU. Although they did not say anything, he could see that OZU was also a shrewd person. He had the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace and no longer had the backing of the 1,000 Illusion Sword sect. There were many people who wanted to kill him. Delta Orgi said at this time, there must be a deeper meaning for him to come to the Southern Divine Peak. Maybe there is something in the Southern Divine Peak that attracted him so much so that he took the great risk to stay here. It's very possible. Lung Shiqi continued, there is no time to lose. Let's go to the Southern Divine Peak now. Let's go. The Southern Divine Peak was quite famous in the entire Mukon County. At the peak, every 2 or 3 months, there would be thousands of dreamy streaks of light flashing. It could be said to be a miracle. Anyone who passed through Mukon County would come here to take a look at this place, to see this wonderful scene. The Southern Divine Peak was 100 li away from Nantua City. By the time Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi arrived, it was already late at night. But even so, the small town at the foot of the mountain was still brightly lit. Lung Shiqi asked around and found out that according to the frequency of the phenomena in the Southern Divine Peak, these 2 days would be the time when the phenomena would appear again. So many people had gathered here to go up the mountain to take a look. This time, Lung Shiqi had a bit of headache. Now that there were many people gathered at the Southern Divine Peak, there must be people who came to assassinate OZU mixed in. Delta Orgi also realized that they were in trouble. They looked at each other and decided to go up the mountain overnight. Chapter 280. The Southern Divine Peak towered into the clouds, and the mountain path was extremely rugged. However, under the night sky, there were still figures entering the mountain. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi were 2 of them. The night was no longer an obstacle for spirit cultivators in the Spirit Pulse realm. The 2 of them quickly passed through the forest like cheetahs, constantly approaching the peak. Shwa! Lung Shiqi suddenly stopped in his tracks. Delta Orgi also stopped, but she did not ask. She knew that Lung Shiqi must have his reasons for doing so. Lung Shiqi said in a low voice, "There's movement." Immediately, the veins at the corner of his eyes bulged, and his eyes turned green and white. He activated Byakugan. Delta Orgi looked at this pair of eyes. She had seen Lung Shichi activate Byakugan on the last floor of the blood-colored tower, but at that time, her attention was on fusing with the blood beast, so she did not observe carefully. In Lung Shichi's vision, he quickly discovered that there were people fighting 3 miles away. Their cultivation was at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. 2 of them were working together to kill the other person. Lung Shichi immediately said, "Let's go take a look. Maybe we can get some different information." With that, he directly pulled Delta Orgi's wrist and sank into the ground. Delta Orgi knew that Lung Shichi had such a strange method, but it was her first time experiencing it, so she could not help but be a little surprised. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the vicinity of the battlefield. In the battle, the 2 people who worked together wore the same clothes and both used blades. The blade chi contained traces of the soft power of water, so they must be from some sect. The person who was surrounded had inferior and complicated spiritual techniques and looked like a rogue cultivator. At this time, there were already several wounds on his body, and he was bitterly holding on. In the same realm, rogue cultivators were originally weaker than spirit cultivators. Now that he was surrounded by 2 people, if this person did not have the means to escape, he would die here sooner or later. Lung Shichi whispered, "Those 2 people should be from the third-rate force, Horizontal Water Fortress. Are they also here for OZU?" Delta Orgi asked. "It's possible. Let's wait and see." On the other side, under the pressure of the 2 traversing water stronghold people, the rogue cultivator had already revealed a somewhat desperate expression. One of them immediately said arrogantly, "Humph, a little rogue cultivator dares to follow us? You're courting death. Senior brother Jean Fong. Why waste your breath on him? Let's kill him and continue looking for OZU." Jean Fong said meaningfully, "That's true, but junior brother Healy, this person's things." Healy immediately smiled and said, "Of course senior brother Jean Fong will choose first." That rogue cultivator was clearly not dead yet, but they were discussing how to distribute his resources, which made the rogue cultivator both shocked and angry. The rogue cultivator shouted, "You've gone too far." Jean Fong and Healy looked at each other and laughed out loud. They did not put the rogue cultivator in their eyes at all. Following that, 2 sharp saber beams slashed out. The saber aura carried an unending intent as it was about to tear the rogue cultivator into pieces. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared, or rather, a sword beam appeared first. That sword beam was like a shooting star in the dark night, easily breaking Jean Fong and Lee's saber beams. "Who is it?" The 2 of them were shocked. Someone actually came out to cause trouble at this time, and that sword beam just now didn't seem to be very powerful, but it was able to easily shatter their saber beams. This was not simple. The person who came was most likely a middle stage or even a late stage spirit cultivator. At this moment, a figure carrying an ink-colored spirit sword slowly walked over. With every step he took, the killing intent on his body became more obvious. Furthermore, his killing intent was locked on Jean Fong and Lee. Jean Fong immediately shouted, "Who are you? How dare you interfere with our horizontal water fortress?" However, before he could finish his sentence, the other party had already stabbed at him with his sword. This sword was very strange. It did not have any sword chi, sword intent, or sword beam. It was just as fast as a rainbow. What was even stranger was that the sword actually flashed with a blurry light. Following that, the sword blade pierced through Jean Fong's throat. Instant kill with one sword. This person was naturally Lung Shichi. The sword technique he used just now was the very ordinary startling rainbow sword style, but when he stabbed with his sword, he used 2 spiritual techniques at the same time. To be more precise, it was 2 illusions: soul intimidation technique and heart seizing technique. When he went to save Nine Leave in Donglin County, Nine Leave had controlled 3 disciples of the extreme fire manner in an instant, allowing Lung Shichi to kill them in 2 moves. Since then, he had been wondering if he could do the same. Coincidentally, he had learned several illusions in the illusory spirit secret realm, including the soul intimidation technique and the heart-seizing technique. The soul intimidation technique was an illusion that could intimidate the soul. It could infinitely magnify the deepest fear in your heart, causing the victim to fall into a deep fear. The heart-seizing technique would make the victim think that their heart had been taken away. What would happen to a person without a heart? They would die. Therefore, the person who was hit by the heart-seizing technique would be stiff and unable to move. When Lung Shiqi stabbed with his sword, he used these two illusions on Zhan Fang at the same time. These two illusions had already been cultivated to the great perfection realm by Lung Shiqi and could be activated in an instant. In addition, Lung Shiqi's mental strength was abnormally strong. Not only did he have the spiritual illusion realm, but he had also recently absorbed the souls of several spiritual pulse realm cultivators. His mental strength was so strong that even a spiritual pulse realm cultivator in the late stage might not be comparable to him. In addition, he had already opened 9 spiritual pulses of the 5-God flowing light technique, which greatly increased the power of his illusions. In an instant, Zhan Fang was hit by 2 illusions at the same time. Therefore, Zhan Fang was killed in an instant without even using his protective spirit qi. Zhan Fang slowly fell to the ground with a frightened expression. Lung Shiqi took the opportunity to hook his mustard seed bag. Then, a light green soul that others could not see entered his body. This sudden turn of events left He Li and the rogue cultivator dumbfounded. The first to react was the rogue cultivator. He exclaimed and turned to run. However, Lung Shiqi took a few steps and placed the ink jade sword on his neck. As for He Li, he also woke up at this time. He also knew that what he had to do now was to escape. However, a bone sword stopped him. A dark-skinned girl holding a bone sword came towards him. The bone sword exuded a dense cold aura. Before he even got close, it made people feel cold all over. This cold was not caused by cold air, but the kind of cold that was similar to that of a corpse. A light blue protective spirit qi immediately appeared around He Li's body. With a slash of the spirit sword in his hand, 3 ripple-like sword rays whizzed out. Delta Orgi's left hand reached out, and her entire arm instantly turned gray. Immediately, white bone claws appeared and directly shattered the 3 sword rays. He Li still wanted to resist, but his body suddenly froze and his eyes dimmed. Immediately, Delta Orgi's bone sword pierced his heart. Chapter 281. Delta Orgi said with a little displeasure, "I can also kill him. Let's end the battle quickly." Lung Shiqi said. Just now, it was because he had used the illusion to control He Li again that he was easily stabbed to death by Delta Orgi. When the rogue cultivator saw that the 2 people from the Transverse Water Stronghold had died, he felt a wave of joy in his heart. Just now, they wanted to kill him and share his resources, but now they were the ones who died. However, although this person was happy, he was not happy, because his life was still in the hands of others. It was just a change of 2 people. Moreover, the 2 of them could kill the people from the Transverse Water Stronghold in the blink of an eye. Of course, they could kill him easily. "Sir, how should I address you?" Lung Shiqi asked him in an old man's voice. "Ping Buohong." Lung Shiqi asked, "What are you doing at the Southern Divine Peak?" Ping Buohong had just opened his mouth to say something when the black jade sword on his neck emitted a faint sword qi and cut through his skin. Ping Buohong's heart trembled, and he immediately dispelled what he was about to say. "I'm here to kill Ozu." Lung Shiqi thought to himself, as expected. Then, he sneered, "However, with your little ability, even if you meet Ozu, you're just here to die." Ping Buohong's face turned green and red, but what Lung Shiqi said was the truth, so he could only say, "I still have 3 good friends. We'll split up and look for Ozu's traces. I originally wanted to follow the people from the Transverse Water Stronghold to see if I could get any useful information, but I didn't expect to be discovered by them long ago." "Then you don't know where Ozu is." Lung Shiqi's tone was a little cold. Ping Buahong immediately denied it. No, no. Following these two people still has some gains. They said that many people have already set up an ambush at the peak. As long as Ozu appears, they will definitely be able to capture him alive. Therefore, Ozu is definitely not at the peak right now. The Southern Spirit Peak was so big that it would be hard to find him even if he excluded the peak. Lung Shiqi knew that he wouldn't be able to get any valuable information from this Ping Buahong. At this moment, Delta Orgi said, "Do you know how many people are coming to kill Ozu?" This. Ping Buahong paused and said, "I don't know the exact number, but from what I know, there are over 100 loose cultivators, and the number is increasing every day. Just the rogue cultivators alone numbered in the hundreds. There were also people from other small factions that were not included. These people were all at the Spirit Pulse realm." Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi's faces darkened. Their goal was to assassinate Ozu. Of course, it would be best if they could capture him alive. However, there were still so many spirit cultivators in front of them. The difficulty of this mission had already far exceeded that of a 4-star mission. Seeing that Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi were silent, Ping Buahong whispered, "Then can I go now?" "Sure, have a safe journey." After a few breaths of time, Lung Shiqi familiarly dealt with the 3 corpses and absorbed their remnant souls. Delta Orgi said in a deep voice, "What should we do? The more we delay, the less likely we will be able to complete the mission." "That's right, unless we can find Ozu first." Lung Shiqi also felt that this matter was not easy to handle. Fortunately, he still had a stupid method. "You have a way?" Delta Orgi understood the meaning behind Lung Shiqi's words. Lung Shiqi pointed at his eyes and said, "My eyes can see the spirit energy aura within a few miles. I have seen Ozu before and know his spirit energy aura. Next, we will search area by area. As long as he is sure to be in the Southern God Peak, we will be able to find him sooner or later. It's just that the Southern God Peak is too big, and Ozu is not standing still. So this is just the stupidest method." Since the supercilious eyes had already been seen by Delta Orgi, he had nothing to hide. When Delta Orgi heard this, she stared at Lung Shiqi's eyes for a while. "Your eyes are really amazing. Together with your Earth Escape technique, it is really an excellent assassination spirit technique. Although this method is a little stupid, it is the only way. I will have to trouble you." She knew that maintaining this kind of magical eye technique would definitely consume a lot of energy. Lung Shiqi shook his head indifferently. Then, like a moving radar, he opened his supercilious eyes and wandered around the Southern God Peak. However, all the way until dawn, they still had nothing to show for it. Even Lung Shiqi began to suspect that Ozu had already left the Southern God Peak. Delta Orgi also said helplessly, "Let's rest for a while first. Ozu has been in the Southern God Peak for so long without being discovered. He must have some concealment methods. Since you can't find him, others won't be able to find him either." Lung Shiqi closed his supercilious eyes. Even though his mental strength was incomparably strong, he still felt a little lightheaded at this moment. Just as Lung Shiqi wanted to rest for a while, the sky suddenly lit up. Following that, countless dazzling rays of light of various colors sprinkled down, bathing the entire Southern God Peak in a rainbow-colored rain. It was so beautiful that it was unforgettable. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi stood quietly. The light seemed to have a magical power that calmed their anxious hearts. Delta Orgi murmured, "So beautiful." "Yeah, let's go to the peak and take a look." "Ozu, you can't." "Okay, let's go." Lung Shiqi suddenly changed his tone halfway. Just now, he almost became a steel straight man. The two of them walked side by side. Their speed was not fast, and they met many people along the way. Basically, they were a man and a woman. However, Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi were disguised as grandfather and grandson. In the eyes of others, it was a grandfather who brought his granddaughter to broaden her horizons. The higher they went, the denser the dazzling colors in the sky. It was even a little dazzling. Moreover, Those streams of light were constantly changing, like tens of thousands of white clouds forming all kinds of shapes, which made people marvel. When Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi arrived at the peak, there were already 200 to 300 people gathered here. These people were all intoxicated by the thousands of streams of light. Strangely, at this moment, the five-god flowing light technique in Lung Shiqi's body actually began to circulate on its own. Lung Shiqi was shocked. His eyes flashed as he carefully looked at the countless colorful lights in the sky. This seemed to be similar to the scene in the illusory spirit secret realm. He vaguely guessed why Ozu would come here. There must be something related to the divine dream palace on the southern god peak. In other words, Ozu was very likely here. Thinking of this, Lung Shiqi immediately put on a wide cloak to cover the upper half of his face. Seeing his actions, Delta Orgi also restrained her thoughts. Then, Lung Shiqi activated his supercilious eyes. In the next moment, he found the aura that he had been searching for a long time in the crowd. Ozu. Chapter 282. Lung Shiqi finally found Ozu's aura through the supercilious eyes. However, when he looked at Ozu, he saw a woman in her 30s or 40s with an ordinary appearance. Lung Shiqi blinked hard, afraid that he had seen wrongly. At this moment, he finally understood why no one had found Ozu in the southern god peak for such a long time. He was a young man disguised as a middle-aged woman. Who could find him? And if nothing went wrong, Ozu had always been near the peak. With his current appearance, no matter how many people were lying in ambush at the peak, it was impossible for them to think that he was Ozu. Therefore, Lung Shiqi had directly ruled out the peak area last night. If it wasn't for the strange phenomenon in the sky, he probably wouldn't have come here. Delta Orgi noticed Lung Shiqi's strange behavior and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "I found Ozu." Lung Shiqi quietly pointed at a person. Delta Orgi's expression changed. She looked in the direction Lung Shiqi was pointing at, but she didn't see Ozu. She quickly realized that Ozu must have disguised his appearance, so she couldn't tell which one was Ozu. Lung Shiqi could only say, "It's that woman." Delta Orgi raised her eyebrows and looked at the middle-aged woman with an ordinary appearance. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Are you sure you didn't see wrongly?" A person's appearance can be changed, but the aura of the spiritual power in their body can't be changed. It's indeed him. You didn't expect him to disguise himself as a woman, did you? Yes, Delta Orgi said, and it's so delicate. Whether it's his appearance or his body shape, you can't tell that he's actually a young man. Just as they focused their attention on Ozu and were about to find an opportunity to make a move, a loud shout came from not far away. "Ozu, where are you running to?" Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi were both shocked. Did the others also discover Ozu? However, to their surprise, Ozu also appeared on the other side. As soon as Ozu appeared, he immediately ran down the mountain. It seemed that his speed was not slow. Shua. Among the people who were watching the phenomenon of heaven and earth, 90% of them turned their heads at the same time and swarmed out to chase after Ozu. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi froze for a moment, but an idea immediately emerged in their minds. Luring the tiger away from the mountain. The Ozu who had just appeared was definitely fake. His appearance was to lure away all the people who were chasing after Ozu. The two of them tacitly retreated to make way for the others. In the blink of an eye, there were only a dozen people left on the mountain peak. Other than the Lung Shiqi and the Delta Orgi, the other 10 or so people were all below the celestial realm. Clearly, they were here to admire the phenomenon. At this moment, many colorful flowers suddenly sprouted from the ground of the mountain peak. They looked even more beautiful against the endless stream of light in the sky. Lung Shiqi, on the other hand, was shocked. "It's an illusion." His spiritual power surged, and pure spiritual power gushed out from between his brows, isolating the Delta Orgi. As for the others on the mountain peak, they fell to the ground one by one. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi did not need to communicate and fell to the ground as well. At this moment, there was only a middle-aged woman left on the mountain peak. Seeing that everyone had either left or fallen to the ground, she quickly walked to the edge of the cliff and quickly formed a seal with her hands. Following that, streams of light emitted from this person's body, and they actually intertwined with the light in the sky. The aura of this middle-aged woman continued to rise, and soon reached the peak of the first level of the spirit pulse realm. Immediately, a soft sound came from Oziu's body. His cultivation had broken through to the second level of the spirit pulse realm. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi both noticed this. They knew that they could not delay any longer. Oziu did not know how to increase his cultivation so quickly, but the higher his cultivation, the more difficult it would be for Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgi to kill him. At this moment, two figures stabbed at Oziu from the left and right. Lung Shiqi's black jade sword was wreaking havoc. The invisible meridian-piercing sword chi and the faint blue frost sword chi intertwined with each other, creating an unparalleled momentum. Delta Orgi's 3,000 black hair turned into a head of silver hair. Her figure looked even thinner, but her cultivation aura skyrocketed. Her bone sword carried a dense aura of death as it pierced through the night sky towards Oziu. Oziu, who was absorbing the seven-colored light, did not expect that someone would ambush him at this moment. However, he never let his guard down. Oziu pointed his finger at the sky and then lightly tapped it down. Rays of seven-colored light shot down and turned into an exceptionally gorgeous seven-colored rain that enveloped the two of them. However, this exceptionally beautiful rain was filled with destructive, murderous intent. Lung Shiqi did not expect Oziu to be able to borrow the seven-colored light in the sky. He instantly activated the demonic beast blood pattern armor and attached 18 demonic patterns to the black jade sword. In the next moment, over 100 different sword chis surged out, forming a huge vortex that wiped out an unknown amount of seven-colored flowing light. On the other side, several white bone shields appeared around Delta Orgi's body to protect her. After one attack failed, Oziu unsheathed his spirit sword. He was an outstanding disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. Of course, he was best at swordsmanship. And Oziu's spirit sword was also a level 5 spirit weapon. Oziu gently waved his spirit sword, and in an instant, a dazzling sword light streaked across the night sky. The sword light suddenly split into two, and then into four. In the blink of an eye, sword light filled the sky and sprinkled down. Lung Shiqi's eyes narrowed. He knew that most of these sword lights were just illusions, but it was this combination of real and fake that was the most troublesome. Fortunately, Lung Shiqi was also proficient in illusion techniques. His majestic mental strength continued to surge, and in his eyes, the sword light that filled the sky dissipated by more than half. He sheathed his sword and swapped it for a saber. Then, hundreds of green saber lights whizzed out and swallowed all the sword lights. Oziu frowned. He sensed that Lung Shiqi was difficult to deal with, and then turned his gaze to Delta Orgi. This time, Oziu finally moved. He came with his sword in hand, and his figure was constantly changing. Every time he took a step, a 9-petaled, 7-colored lotus flower would appear under his feet. In an instant, a huge lotus flower completely condensed from sword chi suddenly appeared. Oziu pointed the tip of his sword, and the huge 7-colored lotus flower began to spin crazily. Countless 7-colored sword chi shot out, and a layer of the ground on the peak was cut off. Such a powerful sword technique was actually used by Oziu, a spirit cultivator at the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. It was unbelievable. Lung Shiqi suddenly had a thought. If Oziu could borrow the 7-colored light, why couldn't he? Then Lung Shiqi changed the cultivation technique in his body to the 5-god flowing light technique. He immediately sensed the power of the flowing light in the sky clearly. Facing the endless lotus sword chi, Lung Shiqi tilted his black jade sword. With a shake of his body, dozens of 7-colored illusions were scattered. Immediately, the The seven-colored sword chi that blotted out the sky and covered the earth erupted. When Oziu saw this, he exclaimed, "You are Zhuqiu." Chapter 283. The energy in Lung Shichi's sword chi was actually of the same origin as Oziu's lotus sword chi. The gigantic rainbow lotus in the sky and Lung Shichi's rainbow sword chi devoured each other, and neither could do anything to the other. When Lung Shichi heard Oziu say the words Zhuqiu, his heart skipped a beat. He circulated the five-god flowing light technique with all his might, and his body lit up with a faint five-colored light, confirming his identity. Oziu bathed in the seven-colored light and laughed. "Ha! Zhuqiu, you want to obtain the inheritance of my cultivation technique, but I also want to obtain your cultivation technique. This place is specially designed to cultivate the 1,000 Revolutions illusory world technique. It is my home ground." Hearing this, Lung Shichi also realized that although he could also mobilize the seven-colored light, it was much less than Oziu's. He simulated the voice of Zhuqiu and said, "Oziu, even if you are stronger than me, it will be very difficult for you to defeat me in a short period of time. With such a big commotion here, the people you deliberately lured away will return very quickly. At that time, even if you can activate the power of the seven-colored light, you won't be able to survive the siege of hundreds of spirit cultivators." Oziu obviously realized this as well. He retracted his smile, and a complicated expression flashed across his eyes. "You're right, but if it really comes to that, I'll reveal your identity. At most, we'll die together." Lung Shichi silently gave Delta Orgi a look, telling her not to act rashly. He said to Oziu, "Then why do we have to fight to the death here? Since you're here, it means that you've made other discoveries after leaving the illusory spirit realm. Why don't you share it with me? If you have any conditions, feel free to state them." Oziu muttered to himself and said, "It's not impossible to share, but you have to give me a portion of the cultivation technique you obtained first." "And who is this girl?" "She's already at the Spirit Pulse realm at such a young age, and her combat strength is also very astonishing." "What is her identity?" Delta Orgi raised her head and said, "Listen carefully, Oziu was waiting for the next part. Most of his attention was on the Delta Orgi. At this moment, 3 blood tattoos appeared on Lung Shichi's forehead, and a silver-white cape appeared behind him. He used the Serene Fiend blood tattoo and the Holy Silver Deer's Beast Chi battle tattoo. He held the Qing Lin saber in his hand and turned into a black and white phantom, directly arriving in front of Oziu. Oziu did not expect the Lung Shichi to suddenly attack. He roared as if he had gone mad. With a slash of the spirit's sword in his hand, the seven-colored light in the air poured down. Thousands of seven-colored sword chi sealed off the entire peak. Even a spirit aperture realm expert would not be able to do such a thing. However, the Lung Shichi had also attracted a lot of seven-colored light to his body. Just as the boundless sword chi fell, the spirit saber was unsheathed. Among the sword chi that filled the sky, a cold saber light suddenly flashed. That saber light was just a flash. It was not eye-catching at all in the dazzling seven-colored light. However, it was this inconspicuous saber light that instantly shattered all the seven-colored sword chi. Even the streams of light were swept away. A large hole suddenly appeared in the seven-colored sky. It was as if only that saber light was allowed to exist in this world. A flash in the pan. This was the flash in the pan of Lung Shichi's fusion of the saber drawing technique and the full moon swift slash. With this move, the demonic beast blood tattoo armor, beast chi battle tattoo, and serene fiend blood tattoo on Lung Shichi's body all dissipated. His body suddenly felt weak. This saber contained all his spirit power, strength, blood chi, and spiritual power. Now, the spirit power in his body had been emptied of more than 70 to 80%. On the other side, with a ding sound, the rank 5 spirit sword in Oziu's hand was cut into 2. A slender saber mark appeared on his face, almost splitting his face into two halves. Ozu's eyes seemed to have lost their spirit. For a moment, he was stunned. If it wasn't for the rank 5 spirit sword blocking for him, his head would have been separated from his body. This Uchiyu was actually so strong. Even though he had mobilized the power of the heaven and earth vision, he still almost died at the hands of the other party. As an outstanding disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect and the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace, Ozu naturally had a sense of pride. But now, Lung Shichi smashed his arrogance to smithereens. Ozu was stunned, but someone else was not. That was Delta Orgi. At first, Delta Orgi was also shocked by Lung Shichi's heaven-splitting saber strike. However, Lung Shichi had given her too many surprises. She already had some resistance, so she quickly reacted. This was the best time to kill Ozu. Delta Orgi's entire body emitted cracking sounds as if countless bones were dislocated. Then, she actually pulled out her spine from her back. She held the spine like a sword or a whip. Then, dozens of weak and boneless sword shadows pierced towards Ozu with a dense aura of death. What was even more terrifying was that those sword shadows actually emitted a faint layer of ghostly fire. Lung Shichi's heart skipped a beat when he saw this move. The power of this sword move had already far surpassed a rank 4 spiritual skill. It was probably a rank 5 spiritual skill. He couldn't help but feel a little jealous. Having a heavenly origin realm master was indeed different. Ozu finally woke up. When he saw Delta Orgi's attack, he immediately exclaimed, "Ghostbone Cold Fire Sword. Who is the Blood Cloak Pavilion's bone devil to you?" Of course, Delta Orgi wouldn't answer him. She didn't need to answer a dead person. Ozu wanted to resist, but the colorful light around him had already been swept away by Lung Shichi. He was now an injured, second-level spirit vein realm cultivator. Without a spirit sword, how could he resist Delta Orgi's Ghost Bone Cold Fire Sword? At this moment, a ray of golden light shot out from the east. The sun had come out. Ozu immediately revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He muttered, "The time has finally come. I just don't know if it's true or not." Seeing that Delta Orgi's sword was about to reach him, he couldn't hesitate anymore. He gritted his teeth and jumped off the cliff. Delta Orgi's sword pierced through the air. She couldn't help but frown. Ozu's actions were clearly beyond her expectations. Lung Shichi swallowed 2 pills to recover his spirit energy in a row and quickly walked to the edge of the cliff. His white eyes suddenly revealed a look of shock. Delta Orgi turned her head and asked, "What did you find?" Lung Shichi said, "Something's wrong. I don't see Ozu's spirit energy aura. My supercilious eyes can see within a radius of 4 to 5 miles. It's impossible for him to fall so far in such a short period of time." "You mean he disappeared?" Countless possibilities flashed through Lung Shichi's mind. He thought that Ozu seemed to have muttered something before he jumped off the cliff, and he jumped off the cliff at sunrise. Was this all a coincidence? His eyes flashed as he said to Delta Orgi, "Wait for me here." With that, Lung Shichi also jumped off the cliff. What he didn't expect was that Delta Orgi also jumped down. Chapter 284. After Lung Shichi, Delta Orgi, and Ozu all jumped off the cliff, a large group of people rushed back to the peak. These people had been lured away by Ozu from the beginning. That Ozu was very fast, and it took them some effort to catch him. However, they discovered that Ozu was a fake. That person was only wearing a human skin mask that looked exactly like Ozu's face. It was also at that moment that they all sensed the huge spiritual fluctuations coming from the peak and turned back. Unfortunately, other than a dozen people who had fallen to the ground, there was no one else on the peak. Everyone's faces were filled with the word dumbfounded. Lung Shichi, Delta Orgi, and Ozu were already in a secret realm. After they fell off the cliff, a hole opened at the intersection of the sun's golden light and the 7-colored light. They fell into this secret realm through that hole. This secret realm was not big, only about 5 or 6 miles in radius. Looking at the sky, the secret realm sky was surging with 7-colored light like clouds. In the center of the secret realm, there was a thatched hut surrounded by some flowers, grass, and fruit trees. Other than that, there was nothing else. At this moment, Ozu was staring at Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi. Lung Shichi stared at Delta Orgi. In Ozu's opinion, he knew the secret here, and at the same time, he dared to jump down because he was gambling. Lung Shichi and Ozu dared to jump? What lunatics! From Lung Shichi's point of view, he had guessed that the Southern Divine Peak was related to the illusory spirit's secret realm. He and Ozu both had the inheritance of the Divine Dream Palace. Since Ozu dared to jump, he dared to jump as well. However, Delta Orgi also jumped down, which really scared him out of his wits. If this secret realm could only accept people with the Divine Dream Palace's cultivation method, Delta Orgi would have been smashed to pieces. Fortunately, Delta Orgi could enter this secret realm as well. As for Delta Orgi, she wasn't that pretentious. She knew Lung Shichi the best. Since he dared to jump, it meant that there wouldn't be any danger, so she jumped down as well. Therefore, she was also very puzzled. Why was Lung Shichi staring at her like that? Thus, up until now, the three of them were in a state of confusion. Gusan was the first to make a move. She held her bone sword, and a faint ghost fire appeared on the blade. She was about to attack. However, Ozu shouted loudly, "Wait!" O's throat was still locked. The tip of the sword was still locked of Oz's throat. At this moment, Ozu suddenly snapped his fingers. Immediately, the 7-colored stream of light in the sky kept circling above his head. This place has limitless power for me to use. You're no match for me here. But Ozu pointed at Lung Shichi and said, he can also mobilize a portion of the power of light. Although he doesn't have as much as I do, there are 2 of you, so I admit that I can't kill you. However, you can't kill me either. Delta Orgi snorted coldly. How do you know if you don't try? While Ozu was speaking, Lung Shichi had been secretly observing this small secret realm. Then he said, "You're right. The power of light here far surpasses that of the outside world. Even if we use all our strength, it will be difficult to kill you. If you have something to say, just say it." Ozu smiled lightly and said, "Sure enough, it's easier to talk to a man." Delta Orgi's face darkened, but she didn't say anything. Ozu said, "What I mean is that there's no need for us to fight to the death. I still say the same thing. Why don't you and I share our cultivation methods? You came to kill me because you want my cultivation method inheritance. I can also tell you that the cultivation method I obtained is the illusory technique of 1,000 revolutions. You're also someone who obtained the inheritance of a cultivation method. If I'm not wrong, the cultivation method you obtained is also sealed. So, you should know that even if you force me, I can only give you the first level of the cultivation method at most. You can forget about getting the rest." Lung Shichi nodded and said, "That's true. What do you want?" "Zuichioyu." "No, you're not Zuichioyu. Even your current appearance is not your true appearance." Since Lung Shichi came to the Southern God Peak with the identity of Old Man Lu, he was wearing the demonic beast blood pattern armor when he fought with Ozu. Ozu used the cultivation method to determine that he was Zuichioyu. Now, Lung Shichi revealed the appearance of Old Man Lu without the cover of the armor. Naturally, he revealed that he was not Zuichioyu. Ozu said, "I'm not interested in your true identity. Why don't we sit on a business deal? This can be considered a little sincerity from me. You want to exchange cultivation methods, right?" Lung Shichi had already guessed what Ozu was going to say. Ozu nodded and said, "That's right. You and I are both at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. We only have the first level of the cultivation method. Our cultivation methods come from the same source. If we can verify each other, we will definitely benefit a lot." Lung Shichi did not say anything. Ozu continued, "You can think about it first. Also, this little girl should be an assassin from the Blood Garment Pavilion. Ozu changed the topic to Delta Orgy. He recognized the Delta Orgy's moves on the cliff, so it was easy for him to guess her identity. What you want is my head. I can give it to you as well. Ozu's words were shocking. He actually said such a sentence. Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy were confused. Just now, Ozu said that there was no need to fight to the death and exchange cultivation methods with Lung Shichi. Now, he wanted to give away his head. What was Ozu selling in his gourd? Lung Shichi suddenly thought of the Ozu who had led everyone away at the beginning. He said, "Do you want to use a disguise technique to disguise yourself? Do you think the Blood Garment Pavilion and the employer are fools?" Ozu snorted coldly and said, "The one outside is just an idiot who was controlled by my illusion technique. Look at this." He took out a dark red square box from his mustard seed bag. Lung Shichi took it and opened it. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Inside the box was a head. Ozu's head. Ozu said, "Don't make a fuss. This head is not disguised in any way. You can take it to report. If this head is real, then who are you?" Delta Orgy asked coldly. "Who said he's real? I just said that there's no disguise. I'm Ozu, and the owner of this head is Ozisu. He's my twin brother." Lung Shichi secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. He said, "You've already prepared this head, haven't you? The Southern Divine Peak is in Mukon County. As everyone knows, this is the headquarters of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Those sanctimonious people from the Thousand Illusion Sword sect will definitely find assassins from the Blood Garment Pavilion to kill me." Although he did not answer directly, the meaning of his words was already very obvious. Ozu had already made all the plans before coming to the Southern Divine Peak. He had already expected that the Blood Garment Pavilion would kill him. Even if he could use the seven-colored flowing light to fight against the enemy, if the assassins from the Blood Garment Pavilion failed, there would be stronger assassins coming next time. Sooner or later, he would be killed by the assassins. Therefore, he prepared the head of his twin brother. He was good at illusions and could completely fake his death to escape. Thinking of this, Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy had to admit that Ozu was indeed ruthless and shrewd. Chapter 285. In the small secret realm, Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy fell into silence. The main purpose of their trip was to assassinate Ozu. If possible, it would be best to obtain the inheritance of his cultivation method. Now that Ozu had taken out a head that could be passed off as the real thing, they could take it a hand in their mission. As for the cultivation method, they could also exchange it with him. All of this seemed to be good. For Ozu, he had not only escaped the pursuit of the blood clothing pavilion, but also obtained Lung Shichi's cultivation method. It was killing two birds with one stone. In this way, this was really a win-win deal. However, Lung Shichi still had a question in his heart. Your twin brother's head can be temporarily deceived, but as long as someone finds out about your brother's death, they will still suspect that you used the flower transplant technique to fake your death. A hint of hatred appeared on Ozu's face. "Do you think that my family will still be safe after I become a traitor of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect? Do you think that this head is the one that I killed my own brother? This is him. He gave it to me of his own accord." Ozu's eyes were instantly filled with countless blood vessels. His handsome face also became ferocious, and his entire body emitted an astonishing amount of hatred. Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy looked at each other. At this moment, their hearts couldn't help but fluctuate. It seemed that there was an unknown secret behind Ozu's betrayal of the sect. However, Lung Shichi wasn't interested in these things. Since there was no flaw in this head, he accepted it. This action also meant that he agreed to Ozu's suggestion. Seeing this, Ozu slowly calmed down and said, "You can cultivate here for the next 2 or 3 months." "What? 2 or 3 months?" Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy were shocked when they heard this. Ozu said, "The entrance to this small secret realm will only open when the seven-colored stream of light appears on the southern god peak and the first ray of sunlight intersects. So if you want to go out, You can only wait for the next time. This, Lung Shichi didn't know what to say. 2 or 3 months was not a long time. Moreover, he had a habit of storing a lot of food and water in his mustard seed bag. Therefore, it was not impossible for him to live here for a period of time. But the missions they accepted had a time limit. 1 month's time limit. By the time they left, the mission would have expired. Furthermore, Wu Xiang had told him not to run around randomly. It was not a big deal for him to run to the southern Divine Peak. After all, it was not that far away. But if he were to stay here for 2 to 3 months, he would have to endure Wu Xiang's wrath when he got out. Lung Shichi frowned and asked, "Is there no other way?" "No." Oziu answered firmly. "This is actually the place where one of the 3 palace masters of the Divine Illusion Palace, Thousand Chance Illusion, went into closed-door cultivation. It was a coincidence that I was able to come here. Apart from the method I just mentioned, there was no other way. Besides, the spirit power here is even denser than in the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. Especially for you. You can use the power of the flowing light here to quickly increase your cultivation. What a great opportunity this is, and you're actually not happy." With that said, Lung Shichi could only accept this fact. Moreover, as Oziu said, this place was indeed a treasure place for Lung Shichi to cultivate. At this moment, he finally understood that Oziu had spent so much effort to come here to cultivate. At the same time, he could also avoid being hunted down. It was indeed a good place. But how did Oziu know about this place? How did he know the way to enter the secret realm? Could this have something to do with his betrayal of the sect? Questions appeared in Lung Shichi's mind one after another. He even began to doubt the authenticity of Oziu falling in love with the witch of the demonic path. However, not long ago, he was still fighting to the death with Oziu. In the end, they were still enemies. Therefore, even if he asked, Oziu would not say anything. Next, Lung Shichi and Oziu exchanged cultivation techniques. He also obtained the first level of the illusory world art of 1,000 revolutions. Then, Oziu ignored them and went into the thatched hut to cultivate. Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi walked to the side of the secret realm. He said, "How trustworthy do you think Oziu's words are?" Delta Orgi replied, "It doesn't matter whether we believe the rest or not. Now that we've gotten what we want, it's enough as long as the matter of getting out is true." Lung Shichi nodded. "During this period of time, we must not let our guard down. After all, this is his home ground." In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. On this day, Lung Shichi and Oziu sat cross-legged facing each other. Their eyes were shining with a 7-colored light. Delta Orgi was playing with a white bone dagger in boredom. Obviously, she was used to this kind of behavior from the two of them. After a long while, Oziu snorted. His face turned slightly pale, and his eyes returned to normal. He sighed softly and said, "Sigh, I lost again. Brother Lung is still better." Lung Shichi chuckled and said, "I only have the advantage of mental power. In terms of control of illusion, Brother O is still better." Oziu waved his hand and said, all right. A loss is a loss. Let's call it day. Then we'll take our leave first." Lung Shichi then got up and returned to his hut with Delta Orgi. In the past 3 months, Lung Shichi and Oziu had gotten to know each other through fighting. In the beginning, they were still on guard against each other. Later, as a deal, they guided each other's cultivation techniques. The two of them were both good at swordsmanship and illusion. When they had nothing to do, they would spar a little. Gradually, they felt like they had met each other earlier. Now, they would routinely spar with swordsmanship and illusion every day. However, Lung Shichi won more than he lost. Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi could not be used as beds and blankets all day long in this secret realm. Thus, Lung Shichi used the Hand of Earth to build 2 mud houses. These days were perhaps the most comfortable period of time for the two of them. There was no killing, no crisis, and no deception. Every day, they cultivated and sparred. When they had nothing to do, they could chat. Their days were very quiet. Fortunately, there were many fruit trees in this secret realm, so they did not have to worry about food. Since Lung Shiqi also cultivated the Thousand Revolutions illusory world technique, he had a unique advantage in cultivating here. After consuming the Three Revolutions spirit melting pill just 2 days ago, his cultivation was already at the 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm. This speed was even faster than Ozu's. Right now, Ozu was still stuck between the 2nd and 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm. He was still troubled by opening his spiritual pulse. The main reason was that Lung Shiqi's spiritual pulse had already been opened. All he needed to do was to accumulate spiritual power. In this small secret realm, the spiritual power was already very rich. He could also absorb the 7-colored flowing light and convert it into spiritual power. That was why he had such a terrifying cultivation speed. Delta Orgy's progress was also not small. Although she could not actively absorb the 7-colored flowing light, even if she passively absorbed it in this environment, her cultivation had reached the peak of the 1st level. It was a pity that Lung Shiqi had also taught her the introductory chapter of the 5-God flowing light technique, but Delta Orgy could not comprehend it. She did not have the talent in illusion. However, just after Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgy took a few steps, the 7-colored light in the sky above the secret realm suddenly surged like the wind and clouds. They looked at each other and saw a touch of joy in each other's eyes. The exit of the secret realm was about to open. Chapter 286. At this time, Ozu walked over. He hesitated for a moment before saying to Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgy, "You must be careful when you go out. There might be experts eyeing you." Lung Shiqi raised his eyebrows. Ozu seemed to know something. He asked, "What do you mean?" Ozu sighed deeply and said, "Forget it. There's no harm in telling you this. This is about my betrayal of the sect." Ozu then told them the whole story of his betrayal of the sect. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgy were both shocked and bewildered. It turned out that ever since Ozu obtained the inheritance of the cultivation method in the illusory spirit secret realm, he had fallen into a deep vortex. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect's ultimate skill, the Thousand Illusion Sword Art, was a mysterious sword manual that combined swordsmanship and illusion. However, how many people in the world could be proficient in both swordsmanship and illusion at the same time? Not to mention combining the two. Hundreds of years ago, the founder of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect, the Thousand Illusion Sword Sovereign, was a talented person. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect was also promoted to one of the 8 Wastelands weapon paths under his hands. However, in the past few hundred years, although the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had produced a few experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage, none of them had been able to fully comprehend the Thousand Illusion Sword Art. No one could practice the fundamental cultivation method of a sect, so the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had been relying on its foundation. In the past 200 years, there had been no experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage. Now, the head of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect was old to the point of decay. Once the current head died, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect would no longer have any experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage. It was very likely that they would fall out of the 8 Wastelands weapon paths. Therefore, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect urgently needed another profound cultivation method to save their ending. The cultivation method that Ozu obtained in the illusory spirit secret realm became their hope. As soon as Ozu returned to the sect, he was persuaded by a group of elders to hand over the cultivation method. Ozu could understand the difficulties of the sect, but he only had the 1st level of the Thousand Revolutions illusory world technique. The rest was sealed in the depths of his mind. What he said was the truth, but when it fell into the ears of others, it became perfunctory. The upper echelons of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect were unhappy, but Ozu was their future hope, so it wasn't good to make things too stiff. Thus, Ozu was placed under house arrest. Every day, people came to persuade him. But one day, for some reason, Ozu had a conflict with a deacon elder who came to persuade him. He even killed 2 of the elder's disciples. Once this matter came out, it blew up. Ozu was captured on the spot, and sent to the torture hall. According to him, he did make a move at that time, but he was actually controlled by someone. Some people believed what he said, but the majority of the people still didn't believe it. There were even some who suggested searching Ozu's memories and directly extracting the cultivation method. However, this method could easily cause Ozu's mental strength to collapse and directly become an idiot, thus destroying a peerless genius. What was laughable was that there were actually quite a few people who agreed with this approach. In their opinion, as long as the sect had a cultivation method, they would have a foundation which was equivalent to having a chance to rise again. Even if he had to sacrifice a genius, it would be worth it. This matter was too important, and the upper echelons of the Thousand Illusions sword sect argued endlessly about it. And the strange thing was, just when Ozu thought that he couldn't escape death, someone actually quietly let him go and escorted him all the way out of the Thousand Illusions sword sect. After that, he made his preparations and went all the way to the Southern Divine Peak, where he met Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi. As for the matter of him falling in love with the demonic path, which it was purely false. Hearing this, Lung Shichi's first reaction was that there was a ghost. In the first half of this story, it was still understandable. A sect that had already begun to decline. In order to protect the position of the 8 Desolate Weapons path, it was indeed possible for them to interrogate their disciples about their cultivation method. However, from the fact that Ozu had suddenly killed someone and was let go, it was as if there was a pair of big hands behind all of this. In that case, the person behind Ozu's arrival at the Southern Divine Peak must have known. Now, that Ozu had suddenly disappeared here for 3 months, it was very likely that the other party had set up a lot of spies in the Southern Divine Peak to look for Ozu. If Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi suddenly appeared, it was indeed possible for them to be targeted. Lung Shichi said at this time, "We will be careful about this matter. Brother O, it's best if you don't go out casually." Ozu said, "Go out? I won't go out until I reach the Spirit Aperture Realm." Spirit Aperture Realm? Ozu actually wanted to cultivate to the Spirit Aperture Realm in one go. However, even if he cultivated in the secret realm, it would take him at least 2 or 3 years. In other words, he would have to stay in this uninhabited place for 2 or 3 years. Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi couldn't help but be moved. Especially Delta Orgi. She knew the pain of cultivating alone the best. At this moment, she couldn't help but admire Ozu. At this time, a crack appeared in the air of the small secret realm. Lung Shichi knew that the time had come and couldn't be delayed any longer. He cupped his fists and said, "See you later. See you later." Then, Lung Shichi brought Delta Orgi into the crack. Outside, today was the day when the Southern Divine Peak appeared again, and it still attracted many people to come and watch. However, what no one noticed was that 2 figures suddenly appeared on the side of the cliff at the top of the mountain. After Lung Shichi and Delta Orgi left the secret realm, Delta Orgi threw out a bone whip and deeply embedded it into the mountain wall. She pulled hard, and Lung Shichi was stuck to the mountain wall. Then, Lung Shichi used the Hand of Earth, and the 2 of them disappeared into the mountain wall. Their series of actions were all discussed in advance. Their movements were very fast and very quiet, but that little bit of sound still attracted the attention of someone. This was a middle-aged man in his 40s. His cheeks were very old, his skin was dark, and his face was fierce. Originally, he was also admiring the light in the sky, but suddenly his ears twitched slightly, and he immediately heard the sound on the mountain wall. Then, he closed his eyes and carefully sensed. Soon, he noticed a very faint spiritual energy fluctuation under his feet. The corner of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile, and he turned around and walked down the peak. Not long after, Lung Shichi brought Delta Orgi from underground to the mountainside of the Southern Divine Peak and returned to the surface. Delta Orgi let out a sigh of relief and said, "We're finally out." Lung Shichi also laughed in his heart. Back then, they accepted the mission to assassinate Ozu. First, it was to give Delta Orgy blood drops, and second, it was to bring her out to take a look. In the end, not only did they not obtain any blood drops, but they were also trapped for 3 months. At this time, it was raining. The originally colorless rain turned into a rainbow-colored rain under the 7-colored light. It was beautiful. This made the two of them feel a little better. However, at this moment, Lung Shiqi was shocked. He suddenly felt an extreme sense of danger. It turned out that at some point in time, a huge ice hand had already fallen down with extreme cold power. Chapter 287. The giant ice palm smashed down with the power of extreme ice, turning the surrounding trees into ice sculptures in an instant. Lung Shiqi and Delta Orgy were both shocked. They were at the early stage of the spirit pulse realm, but they felt as if they had fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cellar. Even the spiritual energy in their bodies was about to be frozen. The person who attacked was at least a spirit aperture realm expert. Although they were shocked, they didn't slow down. As they retreated, several bone shields appeared around Delta Orgy to protect her. Lung Shiqi instantly activated his demonic beast blood rune armor and sent out 6 palm shadows. The palm shadows immediately attracted the surrounding rainbow light. Then, the 6 palm shadows merged into one and turned into a huge rainbow palm shadow. The rainbow palm shadow rose into the sky and collided with the giant ice palm. Boom! The two forces exploded. With Lung Shiqi as the center, the ground within a radius of 10 meters cracked and sank. His rainbow palm shadow had already dissipated, leaving only a thin layer of the giant ice palm, but it still smashed down. Lung Shiqi let out a low roar, and flames suddenly appeared around his feet. The flames spiraled into the air, forming a huge pillar of fire that soared into the sky. This was a spiritual technique that Lung Shiqi created over the past 3 months by combining the fire symbol technique and spirit attack, flame bombardment. Chi. The intertwining of ice and fire caused a large amount of fog. Fortunately, the giant ice palm was finally neutralized. Lung Shiqi roared, "Run!" At this time, Delta Orgy's bone shields had already turned into ice shields. She directly gave up on the bone shields and turned to run without hesitation. She knew that with her strength, there was no room for her to intervene. Instead, she would be a burden to Lung Shiqi. She believed that Lung Shiqi, who could use the power of the rainbow light, would have a way to escape. As Delta Orgy fled, she also crushed the pendant that she wore. You can actually use part of the world. It's really hard to imagine. A figure appeared in front of Lung Shiqi. Strangely, the raindrops from the sky disappeared automatically when they were a few inches away from him. He was the skinny and dark man who had noticed the commotion just now. "Who are you? Why do you want to kill us?" Lung Shiqi asked in a deep voice. "You've seen OZU." Lung Shiqi was about to deny it, but the skinny and dark man said, "You don't have to deny it. You have his scent on you. Tell me where he is. If I tell you, I won't have to die." The man said, "Maybe, TSK." Lung Shiqi sneered, but in fact he was constantly thinking of a way to escape. "Don't tell me you're still thinking of escaping. That was just a casual attack for me. I just wanted to keep you alive." The man said casually. Then he stretched out a finger, and a dark blue cold air condensed on his finger. No, that wasn't frigid chi, but frigid wind. Gang Spirit Realm. Lung Shiqi was shocked. He was facing a master of Gang Spirit Realm. "Put away all your thoughts and take me to OZU. This is your only chance to survive." "Oh, that's right. There's also that little girl. She has an ice imprint on her body. With just a thought, I can instantly kill her." "Okay, I promise you." Lung Shiqi nodded with hatred. "OZU is..." Lung Shiqi suddenly exclaimed, "What is this?" It turned out that colorful petals were falling around them quietly, and the number was increasing. The skinny and dark man also noticed these petals, and a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. But at this fleeting moment, Lung Shiqi's figure suddenly changed into hundreds of colorful phantoms. The hundreds of phantoms immediately scattered in all directions and fled madly. Seeing this scene, the skinny and dark man was shocked even though he was in gang spirit realm, because he couldn't tell which phantoms were real for a while. He had the ability to sense the breath, but the hundreds of phantoms all had the breath of the real one. He had never seen such a brilliant illusory skill. Humph! The skinny and dark man snorted. He pointed his finger as a sword. In an instant, endless ice sword aura flew out violently, and the area within a radius of 1,000 feet was covered by the ice sword aura. Most of Lung Shichi's colorful phantoms were destroyed in an instant, but the rest of the phantoms were still fleeing in all directions, and they were all very fast. The skinny and dark man had not found the real one yet, and his face became ferocious. The ice sword aura burst out under his control. The horrible gang spirit broke out, and the whole mountainside immediately became a mess. The gang spirit destroyed the phantoms one after another. When the last one dissipated, the skinny and dark man was stunned. There was still no real one. All the phantoms were fake. At this time, the skinny and dark man suddenly remembered that when he was on the peak, he had sensed the breath of Lung Shichi and Delta Orgy underground. He immediately understood. Just now, the real one of Lung Shichi must have drilled into the ground and escaped. The skinny and dark man was furious. He was fooled by a junior in spiritual pulse realm. Ah! A long sword flashing with cold light appeared in the skinny and dark man's hand. It was a 6th-level spiritual weapon. He stood with the sword in his hand, and his whole body burst out an amazing sword intent. Go to hell. The skinny and dark man's long sword suddenly stabbed down. Endless ice sword intent poured into the ground, and the whole underground became an ice hell, whether it was the soil or the gravel. After a few seconds, a figure in demon armor drilled out of the ground awkwardly. Of course, it was Lung Shichi. At this moment, his back was covered in frost. Even if he tried his best, he couldn't get rid of it. Fortunately, the demonic beast blood pattern armor didn't let the coldness enter his body for the time being. The moment he drilled out of the ground, he stepped on the black mist and immediately activated the Holy Silver Deer's beast essence battle pattern. He turned into a black and white stream of light and fled as fast as he could. The skinny and dark man swung his sword, and a several-meter-long ice sword intent whizzed out. It directly tore through the sky and cut through space. As the ice sword intent approached, Lung Shichi suddenly felt that death was coming. Just as he was about to use fleeting epiphyllum to fight for his life, a strange scene appeared. Suddenly, the void seemed to have frozen. Whether it was the rain, the swaying trees, or the huge ice sword intent, they all strangely stopped moving. Even the skinny and dark man didn't move. The only one who could move was Lung Shichi. He didn't know what had happened. He only knew that now was the best time for him to escape. No, there was still one person who could move. It was a slightly fat man. He was dressed in bloody clothes and walked slowly. He stretched out a hand and clenched it. The arrogant master in gang spirit realm directly burst into a cloud of blood mist. My disciple is not someone trash like you can touch. Chapter 288. The killer was Lung Shichi's cheap master, Wu Xiang. Lung Shichi was really horrified. He was horrified by Wu Xiang's strength. The one who chased after him was a master of gang spirit realm. He was a master of supreme power who could establish a sect and a second-class force outside. If Lung Shichi hadn't been able to mobilize part of the power of the colorful flowing light, he would have been killed by the ice handprint. However, Wu Xiang was able to destroy such an expert with a flip of his hand. This was the strength of a master of oneness of heaven and men realm. This was the strength of a killer of bloody underworld. While Lung Shichi was still in shock, Wu Xiang slapped him away. Wu Xiang said in a sharp voice, "I told you not to run around, but you ran directly to South Divine Peak. What are you doing here? You're so young, but you're so scheming. You came here and hid for 3 months. Do you know how worried I was? Lung Shiqi was a little touched when he heard this. But Wu Xiang continued, Do you know that I went to ask for a good fortune for you? But in the end, you disappeared. I'll become a joke. Don't I care about my reputation? Lung Shiqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was touched for nothing, but it was true that Wu Xiang did save his life. But why did Wu Xiang appear here? Did he come here specifically to find me? Lung Shiqi thought to himself, but he suddenly shivered and said hurriedly, By the way, Delta Origi is still nearby. But Wu Xiang said, Save it. She has been taken away by Bone Demon. Bone Demon? Bone Demon, the first elder of Blood Robe Pavilion, a master of Tianyuan realm, also came here in person. It seemed that Delta Orgi was very important to Bone Demon. At this time, the power of a remnant soul poured into his body. It was the remnant soul of the master of Gang's spirit realm, which was a great supplement for Lung Shiqi. He felt comfortable in his body, and then asked with a little doubt, Master, do you know who that person was? Humph, he has been avoiding using the unique skills of the sect, but he's still exposed that his cultivation method is 1,000 illusory sword tactics. 1,000 illusory sword tactics. He was from 1,000 illusory sword sect. Is he the mastermind behind the scenes mentioned by Oziu? Lung Shiqi thought, and couldn't help glancing at Wu Xiang. However, Wu Xiang did not pay attention to him. Following that, Wu Xiang brought Lung Shiqi and left the southern god peak. Along the way, he did not mention a single word about Oziu, which made Lung Shiqi feel a little strange. He had prepared some excuses, but now he didn't need to use them at all. Suddenly remembered what had happened in the past. When he first arrived at the Donglin County branch, he had entered the tomb of Boiwan Hu. However, when he returned to the branch, the head of the Grand Pavilion, Ghost Ju, did not ask him where he had gone. Later, in the Demon Mountain Demon Use, in Demon Demonic Demons, Feng Shamo knew that he had gone to the Demon Miasma Mountain Range. However, there was a beast hide in the Demon Miasma Mountain Range, followed by the Great Demon's Tribulation and the Imperial Beast Abode and Blood Beast Sect fighting there. The Blood Robe Pavilion definitely had this information, but Feng Shamo had never asked him about the Demon Miasma Mountain Range. After he entered the illusory spirit mystic realm as Zhuoqiyu, everyone knew that Zhuoqiyu had obtained the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation method inheritance. But whether it was Feng Shamo or Wu Xiang or even the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion, they had never mentioned the cultivation method, including his arrival at South Divine Peak. Although he had accepted the mission to assassinate Oziu, the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion knew that both of them had the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation method. Now that he had disappeared for 3 months, not only did his cultivation soar to the 3rd level of the Spirit Vein realm, but he could also trigger the 7-colored light here. How could Wu Xiang not see it? Shouldn't Wu Xiang ask him if he had obtained Oziu's cultivation method? Did he have some kind of opportunity? Why was it completely different from the 1,000 Illusion Sword sect that Oziu was in? After he connected all of this together, he realized one thing. The Blood Robe Pavilion seemed to have given him a lot of freedom, as if they were letting him live. He could not ask where he went. He could also not ask what he had obtained. Even Wu Xiang had never given him any powerful spiritual skills or spiritual weapons. This was completely a method of letting him live. However, this method of letting him live still allowed him to reach the 3rd level of the Spirit Vein realm at the age of 15. Lung Shiqi did not know why the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion would treat him like this, but this was a good thing for him. After all, his secrets could not withstand a strict investigation. With Wu Xiang leading the way, they returned to the Blood Robe Pavilion in 3 days. Wu Xiang did not stay idle along the way. He was nagging from beginning to end, saying that Lung Shiqi had made him lose face. This was the first time Lung Shiqi had spent so much time with Wu Xiang. Only then did he know that he was so talkative. As soon as he returned to the Blood Robe Pavilion, Lung Shiqi remembered something. He took out the head of Oziu and said, Master, Oziu has been killed by me. However, the deadline for the mission has passed. What should I do? The reward for assassinating Ozu was not low. Just the blood drops alone were worth 300 points. It was a pity to give up just like that. Wu Xiang took the head and casually looked at it. It's a small matter. I'll help you arrange it. Lung Shiqi saw that Wu Xiang did not doubt the authenticity of the head and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you, Master. However, I want to give the blood drops for the mission to the Delta Orgy. What do you think? Who knew that before he could finish speaking, Wu Xiang slapped Lung Shiqi on the shoulder. His shoulder vaguely made a crack sound. It was so painful that he grimaced. Fortunately, he was wearing a mask so that he would not make a fool of himself. Wu Xiang's head came over and whispered, "You're amazing. You've already made a move on that little girl. Hee, don't worry. Master will fully support you in this matter. After this matter is done, you must steal a few of Bone Demon's consummate skills for me. As far as I know, Bone Demon has already passed the Ghost Bone Cold Fire Sword to the Delta Orgy. You have to find a way to get it." Lung Shiqi, this topic could not continue, so he had to change the topic. "Master, there's still something I don't understand. Last time you said that you want to ask for an opportunity. What is it?" Speaking of this matter, Wu Xiang's attitude suddenly became serious. He said, "This matter might have happened a few years later, but you and the girl Delta Orgy broke through the spiritual pulse realm one after another, so it was brought forward. Your cultivation is now at the 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm, so you're more confident." Lung Shiqi was immediately confused. However, he was keenly aware that this matter was probably related to the Blood Mist Island. "Master, what do you need me to do?" Wu Xiang said solemnly. "You need to win a bet. You must win." Chapter 289. A bet? A bet that they had to win. Lung Shiqi's heart was filled with doubts. Wu Xiang looked deeply at Lung Shiqi through the mask and said, "The sect spent hundreds of years of accumulation and countless energy to open up Blood Mist Island and nurture the 4 of you. But it's not for you to be assassins. Bloodcloth Pavilion doesn't lack assassins. It doesn't matter if the 4 of you are there or not. Each and every one of you has important responsibilities and tasks to carry out. You are the key to whether or not Bloodcloth Pavilion can break the shackles in the future. And this bet is the beginning of that matter." Lung Shiqi's eyes flashed. In the past, whether it was Feng Shamo or Gui Ju, they had said that the 4 of them were the key to breaking the deadlock of Bloodcloth Pavilion. He guessed what the deadlock of Bloodcloth Pavilion was. Bloodcloth Pavilion was a sword in someone else's hand and had severely limited the development of Bloodcloth Pavilion. It could also be said that many people in Bloodcloth Pavilion were no longer satisfied with just being a sword. Feng Shamo had clearly expressed this attitude in front of Lung Shiqi. But how could they break the deadlock? What were they going to do? What could the 4 of them do with their insignificant cultivation? He didn't know anything. He couldn't even guess. Now, this matter was finally about to surface. Wu Xiang continued, "If you want to break the deadlock, the power of Bloodcloth Pavilion alone is too weak." Weak and alone? Lung Shiqi couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he heard this. Bloodcloth Pavilion was one of the top forces of the 7 absolutes in the world and had 5 sky origin realm experts in the sect. With this, they dominated Muchun County and intimidated the entire Thunderblaze Empire. Even in the entire continent, their prestige spread far and wide. How could such a force be called weak and isolated? Have you heard of the 6 Directions Spirit Region? Wu Xiang's question pulled Lung Shiqi back from his thoughts. Of course, he had heard of the 6 Directions Spirit Region. In the world sect ranking, the 4 Saint Spirit Region was ranked below the 3 Great Empires. The 4 Saint Spirit Region was the holy land in the hearts of countless spirit cultivators. It was said that tens of thousands of years ago, this continent was once ruled by a mysterious race, and the human race was completely like livestock. Later on, 4 supreme experts were born from the human race and overthrew the rule of the mysterious race. They also passed down the spirit cultivation lineage, allowing those with talent to cultivate the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It could be said that the four supreme experts had not only saved the human race, but also created the path of spirit cultivation, and were respectfully called saints. Later on, the four saints went into seclusion and left behind their respective inheritances. That was the four saint spirit region. In other words, the four sacred spirit realms had existed for more than 100,000 years. The amount of resources they possessed was simply unimaginable. However, the four sacred spirit realm had always been in a state of seclusion. Under normal circumstances, they would never appear in the outside world. However, once someone from the four saint spiritual realms appeared, their skills would shock everyone. In the six directions spiritual region that Wu Xiang spoke of was one of the four sacred spiritual regions. Lung Shiqi nodded to indicate that he understood, but why would Wu Xiang suddenly mention the six unity spiritual region? Wu Xiang said, most of the sects that could be ranked on the world sect ranking are top-notch powers, but not all of them are like this. For example, the three great empires and the four sacred spirit realms should be called transcendent powers. This time, our Blood Robe Pavilion has reached an agreement with a transcendent power like the six directions spiritual region. And whether or not these agreements can be finalized will depend on the four of you. When Lung Shiqi heard this, he could already faintly understand. The Blood Robe Pavilion wanted to break the deadlock, but they were still not strong enough, so they boarded the big ship of the six directions spiritual region. Combined with the gambling fight that Wu Xiang mentioned, he guessed that this gambling fight should be a gambling fight between the young disciples of both sides. Lung Shiqi and the other three were seen by the Blood Robe Pavilion as the key to breaking the shackles, but words were not proof. The six directions spiritual region had to see their true abilities. This gambling fight will be carried out by the four of you, and your opponents will be the middle-aged and young disciples of the six directions spiritual region. However, according to our requirements, the disciples sent by both sides cannot be older than 16 years old. According to what I know, the six directions spiritual region sent 2 disciples at the peak of the spirit transformation realm and 2 disciples who have just entered the spirit pulse realm. Their cultivation is the same as yours. However, the six directions spiritual region's inheritance is too long, and who knows how many ancient cultivation methods and spirit skills are hidden in it. Their combat strength is definitely not ordinary. Lung Shiqi suddenly felt a sense of pressure. In the top forces of the world sect ranking, disciples who broke through to the spirit pulse realm at the age of 25 were known as geniuses. For example, Bai Yi and Ozu were like this. However, in the six direction spiritual region, there were also 2 disciples who broke through to the spirit pulse realm before the age of 16. If this news were to be released, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. If the six direction spiritual region was like this, then what about the other 3 spiritual regions? Lung Shiqi felt that he was a frog at the bottom of a well in the past. He had been complacent because he had broken through to the spirit pulse realm early. However, now it seemed that it was nothing to the people of the 4 sacred spirit realms. In addition, the future of the Blood Robe Pavilion depended on this gambling fight, which was equivalent to putting pressure on the shoulders of Lung Shiqi and the others. How could he not feel pressure? However, you don't have to worry too much. Wu Xiang could see that Lung Shiqi was a little stressed. Although the disciples of the six directions spiritual region are not weak in cultivation and spirit skills, their combat experience is far inferior to yours. That's your biggest advantage. Lung Shiqi and the other 3 had experienced countless battles on Blood Mist Island. In terms of combat experience, they were far superior to the disciples of the six directions spiritual region who only knew how to cultivate. At this moment, Lung Shiqi felt an inexplicable excitement in his heart. The gambling fight is set for 10 days later. In these few days, Master will guide you well. Wu Xiang patted Lung Shiqi's shoulder. Of course, this time, it was very light. However, When Lung Shiqi heard this, the first thought that appeared in his mind was, "So, I have a master." After he became Wu Xiang's disciple, the two of them had met less than 5 times. Wu Xiang had never taught him anything. Now that Wu Xiang suddenly said that he would guide him, he felt a little flattered, especially when he thought of the gang spirit realm master of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect who chased after him. He was actually killed by Wu Xiang with one slap, which showed how powerful Wu Xiang was. With such a person guiding him, he believed that his strength could be further improved in a short period of time. In that case, his chances of winning the bet would be even greater. Wu Xiang waved his hand and said, "Well, you know what happened. Go back and have a rest first. Tomorrow morning, go directly to the back mountain to find me." "Yes, I will leave first," Lung Shiqi said and walked to a small courtyard. However, Wu Xiang became sentimental, which was rare for him. Alas, 10 days later, it's up to you. Chapter 290. At dawn the next day, Lung Shiqi came to the back mountain of Wu Xiang Palace. Wu Xiang was already waiting here. Lung Shiqi came early because he was afraid he would be later than Wu Xiang, but he was still late. Wu Xiang said directly, "Next, I will suppress my cultivation to the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. You have to be determined to kill me and use your strongest spirit technique to kill me. If you can force me to move my body or use power beyond the early stage of the spirit pulse realm, you win." Lung Shiqi didn't speak. A heavy wooden spear appeared in his hand. This was the level 4 spirit tool, Astral Wood Spirit Spear, he bought at a high price. Holding the spear, Lung Shiqi's aura was unparalleled. The tip of his spear thrust forward, and the spear body suddenly drew a huge gray cross in the air as it rushed over. Lung Shiqi didn't test it and used the formation breaking cross spear right away. However, Formless only extended a finger and lightly flicked it. The cross-shaped light disappeared into nothingness, and the tip of the spear was stopped by Formless finger. Brave and unparalleled, this spear is not bad. However, you didn't have the resolve to die when you charged into the enemy's formation, nor did you have the resolve to kill me. Therefore, you are still somewhat lacking. Lung Shiqi expected the formation-breaking cross spear to be easily broken, but it was also unexpected. What he didn't expect was that Wu Xiang would be able to break through his attack so easily. Moreover, his spear was a level 4 spirit weapon, yet it couldn't even hurt Wu Xiang's finger. He could clearly feel that Wu Xiang only used the power of the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. But how did he do it? This wasn't just perfect control of power, it also meant that Wu Xiang's body was terrifyingly strong. Lung Shiqi's body wasn't weak, but it wasn't enough in front of Wu Xiang. Since he was already close, Lung Shiqi put away his spear and punched. A tiger phantom pounced with the power to break rivers and sink oceans. Wu Xiang directly slapped away the tiger's shadow, and the invisible inner strength that entered his body did not have any reaction. Both inside and outside. Not bad, but the overall power is not enough. This was also a problem that Lung Shiqi had discovered. He was also trying to integrate Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist into Tiger's Wave-Stomping Fist. However, he had been studying swordsmanship and illusions in the secret realm and had not had the time to study the fist art. On the contrary, Falling Blossoms and Dazzling Blossoms had already merged together. Lung Shiqi's fist didn't work, so he used another palm. The 6 palms combined into one, and a half-feet-tall palm shadow with faint flames smashed down with a loud bang. The formless palm slashed downwards, instantly splitting the 6-yang poison fire palm into 2 halves before dissipating in midair. What a vicious palm strike. You have some skills. However, it's strong on the outside and weak on the inside. Once it encounters an extremely ferocious spiritual technique, it will collapse upon contact. Lung Shiqi had yet to discover the weakness of the 6-yang poisonous fire palm that Wu Xiang had mentioned. The follow-up of this palm strike could be strengthened from this aspect. Next, Lung Shiqi used Earth Fiend Demon Claw, Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist, and blood sky finger respectively. All of them were easily broken by Wu Xiang. However, when he used blood sky finger, Wu Xiang muttered, "It's actually at the great perfection stage." He knew that Lung Shiqi had chosen this spiritual technique in the Blood Book Hall. At that time, he had also blocked Lung Shiqi there. Therefore, Wu Xiang also knew that Lung Shiqi had only used this spiritual technique for 3 months. To be able to cultivate a level 4 spiritual technique to the great perfection stage in 3 months, Lung Shiqi's comprehension surprised him. However, what he didn't know was that Lung Shiqi had only used a dozen breaths of time to cultivate Blood Sky Finger to the great perfection stage. Every time Wu Xiang broke a move, he would point out the weakness of the move. Lung Shiqi had fewer and fewer things that he could take out. Soon after, he retreated and his mental energy surged. His left hand lit up with faint starlight, and then a giant ice sword nearly 2 feet long whistled out. What surprised Lung Shiqi was that Wu Xiang also formed a spiritual seal with his hand and formed an even more powerful giant flame sword. Lung Shiqi's giant ice sword melted before it even got close. In the end, it turned into a cloud of mist like a moth to a flame. Wu Xiang is also a spiritual caster. This was the first time Lung Shiqi knew of Wu Xiang's ability. He couldn't help but be surprised, because he found that Wu Xiang's spiritual technique, physical strength, and mental power were all very strong. This was very similar to him. It was also at this moment that Lung Shiqi vaguely felt that it wasn't a coincidence that Wu Xiang took him as a disciple. But now is not the time to be distracted. He formed a series of seals and flames, surrounded his body to form a giant pillar of fire that shot out. The giant flame sword collided with the pillar of fire and exploded. Waves of fire spread out and scorched the surrounding ground. When the waves of fire dissipated, Lung Shiqi was wearing a set of pitch-black demon armor. Wu Xiang carefully looked at Lung Shiqi's demonic beast blood pattern armor. He felt traces of killing intent from Lung Shiqi. He nodded and said, "Interesting. You finally have the resolve to kill me." The black jade sword was unsheathed. The sharp blade of the level 5 spirit artifact spat out a glaring sword light. Lung Shiqi's spirit and mental power quickly circulated. His aura climbed higher and higher. When his aura reached its peak, Lung Shiqi suddenly disappeared. He suddenly disappeared in front of Wu Xiang's eyes. At this moment, countless beautiful flower petals fell from the sky. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. But there was a huge killing intent hidden in these flower petals. Suddenly, the flower petal spun and shot towards Wu Xiang. It turned out that each flower petal was a sword energy. Wu Xiang murmured, "He actually pulled me into an illusion in an instant. Illusionary and real, real and fake. This move is not bad." At this moment, to Wu Xiang's surprise, 36 phantoms appeared out of thin air and surrounded him. Each phantom was a sword light that intersected with the sword energy in the air. From afar, it formed the illusion of a giant flower. In an instant, the sword light raged and the sword energy rampaged. Chaotic flowers, dazzling eyes, combining movement, sword energy, and illusion into one. This was the true chaotic flowers, dazzling eyes. Wu Xiang finally became cautious. He formed a sword with his finger and a sharp sword intense sword into the sky. Suddenly, countless invisible sword energy burst out and instantly destroyed all the phantoms and flower petals. But he still looked around vigilantly. He did not relax at all because he did not find Lung Shiqi's real body. The next moment, a long river of sword light broke out from the ground and stabbed at Wu Xiang's chassis. "Insidious!" Wu Xiang shouted in a low voice and pressed down with his palm. An invisible force pressed down, preventing Lung Shiqi's sword from moving forward. But at this moment, Lung Shiqi changed his sword for a sword. A cold sword light slashed out as if it was splitting the sky. Wu Xiang felt a chill in his crotch and his whole body trembled. Chapter 291. Inside Wu Xiang Palace. Lung Shiqi sat weakly on a chair, while Wu Xiang paced back and forth with lingering fear. Not long ago, he almost lost his little brother. Lung Shiqi's flash in the pan took more than 80% of his strength, but it also allowed Wu Xiang to use strength that exceeded the early stage of the Spirit Pulse Realm. In other words, Lung Shiqi won. However, ever since they came back, Wu Xiang had been pacing back and forth. Lung Shiqi was a little dizzy, but he couldn't say anything. After a while, Wu Xiang finally stopped and said to Lung Shiqi, "Master has nothing to teach you. As long as you can make up for the shortcomings I mentioned, you can at least beat one person." Lung Shiqi heard what he said. It seemed that this bet wasn't one-on-one, so he asked, "Master, what are the rules of the bet?" Wu Xiang replied, "It's an arena battle. Whoever stands on the arena in the end will be the winner. If it was an arena battle, then there might be a situation of 1 versus 2, or even 1 versus 3. However, before Lung Shiqi could think about it, a gray-clothed disciple appeared outside the door. "Master Wu Xiang, Delta Orgi wants to see Lung Shiqi." "Delta Orgi is here?" Lung Shiqi's heart skipped a beat. Wu Xiang immediately pulled Lung Shiqi and said, TSK, you're quite capable. Don't forget what Master said, get a few spirit techniques." Lung Shiqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he guessed that Delta Orgi was here for the spirit techniques. After a while, Lung Shiqi brought Delta Orgi back to his small courtyard. Delta Orgi went straight to the point and said, "The 300 drops of blood have been given to me. I'm here to fulfill my promise." Lung Shiqi said politely, "If I hadn't accepted the mission to assassinate Oziu, causing a delay of 3 months, I'm afraid you would have already been promoted to a blood-clothed assassin. But if it weren't for this trip, I wouldn't have seen the heavenly phenomenon of the Southern Divine Peak, and my cultivation wouldn't have advanced so quickly. You won't realize that there is such a big gap between us." At this point, Delta Orgi's tone had a complicated meaning. Lung Shiqi knew that Delta Orgi's competitive nature was showing again. In this trip to the Southern Divine Peak with Delta Orgi, the strength shown by Delta Orgi was far inferior to that of Lung Shiqi, whether it was against Oziu or the pursuit of Gang Spirit Realm. Although Delta Orgi was already very strong among the same level, she knew very well that the gap between them and Lung Shiqi was huge. Unknowingly, Lung Shiqi had left her in the dust. This made her very uncomfortable. This matter had instead become the motivation for Delta Orgi to cultivate even harder. Now, she was no longer curious about the colorful world outside. She just wanted to improve her strength as soon as possible. Delta Orgi continued, "Before doing the mission, I promised to give you spiritual skills. But we've only done one mission, and I've already thought of a way to get the remaining blood drops, so I can only give you a 3rd-level spiritual skill as a reward." Okay, Lung Shiqi could accept it completely. He even felt that he had made a small profit. Delta Orgi took out a piece of paper with the names of 4 spiritual skills written on it. "Pick one." Lung Shiqi looked at it and asked, "Why don't you just give me the secret manual of the spiritual skill? If that was the case, he could directly use his infinite skill points to learn it. That would be a huge profit." Although Delta Orgi was wearing a mask, Lung Shiqi could feel that she was rolling her eyes at him. "It's too troublesome to write them one by one. Besides, do you think I don't know that you have a photographic memory? You still want to take advantage of me?" Lung Shiqi smiled embarrassedly. Fortunately, with the mask, he didn't make a fool of himself. Then, he carefully looked at the contents of the paper. The 4 spiritual skills on it were Triple Origin Cyan Spirit Sword, Impermanent Steps, Shifting Bone Technique, and Red Poison Curse. Lung Shiqi directly eliminated the first 2. He didn't need the 3rd-level blade and movement techniques at the moment, so he could only choose between the remaining 2. The Shifting Bone Technique was a spiritual skill that could slightly change one's body shape. Lung Shiqi had a human skin mask and a voice-changing technique. If combined with the Shifting Bone Technique, he could change into many different identities. It was a practical spiritual skill that could conceal one's identity. The red poison curse was a spiritual skill that was similar to a curse. The reason why Lung Shiqi wanted this spiritual skill was because his centipede curse could no longer keep up with his cultivation. Before the fourth realm of heaven, the centipede curse was still very useful. However, for spirit cultivators in the spirit pulse realm, the centipede curse was easily suppressed. For example, the Black Veil woman last time, she only used a few breaths of time to suppress the centipede curse. He believed that she would be able to expel the centipede curse from her body in no time. Therefore, Lung Shiqi also wanted a spiritual skill that could control others. But after pondering for a while, he finally chose the shifting bone technique. He wanted the red poison curse, but he currently had the ability to control illusions, so he didn't need it. Moreover, he could use his blood droplets to exchange for this kind of spiritual technique. However, the shifting bone technique was different. He often went out, so it was very important to conceal his identity. Moreover, this spiritual skill was probably related to the bone demon, so it probably couldn't be exchanged. Thus, Lung Shiqi said, "I want the shifting bone technique." Delta Origi said, "I knew you would choose this. I've already prepared it for you." As she spoke, she took out a secret manual. This spiritual skill can't be taught to outsiders, but Master said that you performed well in the Southern God Peak, so he made an exception. Huh? Lung Shiqi didn't understand what the bone demon meant by performed well. However, since it was personally instructed by the bone demon, he felt even more at ease. "I just started cultivating the shifting bone technique, so I don't have any insights to give you. Of course, I don't think you need it. By the way, although I believe you won't do this, I still have to say that you can't spread it." "Of course," Lung Shiqi said seriously. Then, he changed the topic. "You should know about the bet." Speaking of this, Delta Origi's body tensed up. She said seriously, "I know. This matter is very important. We can only win, not lose." Lung Shiqi said, "You don't have to put too much pressure on yourself. The disciples of the Lioha spiritual region have their advantages, but we also have advantages that they don't have." "I understand what you're saying. This is also the method I mentioned before to obtain large amounts of blood drops. What do these two have to do with each other?" Lung Shiqi couldn't help but be puzzled. Delta Origi said, "Of course it's related. If we win the bet, do you think we'll win for nothing? When the time comes, I'll ask the sect for blood drops. They'll definitely agree." This is indeed a method. Lung Shiqi nodded. He also wondered if he should ask for something if he won. Chapter 292. 10 days later, at the Bloodkill Hall, all the big shots of the Blood Row Pavilion had arrived. The two pavilion elders, the pavilion leader, Hateful Blade, the vice pavilion leader, Ink Frost Ghost, and the disciplinary grand elder, Bone Devil, were all present. Other than them, there were Formless, Lung Shiqi, Delta Origi, Yushu, and Humming. After so many days, Lung Shiqi finally got to see Yushu and Humming. Yushu was still the same black-robed assassin. He was currently wearing a mask that only revealed his eyes and winking at Lung Shiqi. As for Humming, he still had that unapproachable expression on his face. It seems like they haven't changed much, Lung Shiqi thought to himself. He had thought that Yushu would change after becoming the Pavilion Master's personal disciple. He thought that Yushu would look down on him, the disciple of the Underworld Bloodkill Pavilion. Then, Yushu would use his powerful cultivation to slap him in the face. But that was not the case at all. The four of them had stood out from tens of thousands of people. If they didn't even have that little bit of temperament, it would be a waste. Not long after, 5 people walked into the Bloodkill Hall. The one at the front was an old man with an elegant temperament. He didn't have the slightest bit of aura, but every step he took felt like he was stepping on the pulse of heaven and earth. It was as if he had become one with heaven and earth. Behind the old man were 4 youths, 3 boys, and 1 girl. They all looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. The 4 of them looked left and right curiously, as if they rarely went out of the house. However, the cultivation bases of these 4 youths were extremely terrifying. 2 were at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, and 2 were at the spirit vein realm. They were the geniuses of the 6 directions spiritual zone, the opponents of Lung Shiqi and the others. After these people entered the Bloodkill Hall, Hateful Blade and the others stood up to welcome them. Only the 2 elders remained seated. Hateful Blade said, "Elder Shao, please excuse me for not going out to meet you." Elder Shao said bluntly, "We don't have much time. Let's begin." Hateful Blade didn't say anything. He used his palm as a blade and chopped down. With his palm as the center, ripples appeared in the space. Those ripples spread out, covering the entire Bloodkill Hall. Lung Shiqi was shocked to find that the surrounding scenery had suddenly changed into a grassland. He was stunned at first. Then, he rubbed the ground with his feet and realized that the grass and soil on the ground were all real. Huge waves of emotions surged in his heart. Changing space with a flip of his hand, what kind of heaven-defying ability was this? At this time, Elder Shao also looked deeply at Hateful Blade, and a trace of fear flashed through his eyes. It was like a storm that directly shattered Shao Fu's blue moon. Shao Fu's expression changed slightly. His blade aura immediately changed, becoming dignified and majestic. The 2 completely opposite blade auras continued to clash, and the spectators were a bit dazzled. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that overall, Shao Fu had the upper hand. Delta Orgi asked Lung Shiqi, "Who do you think will win?" Lung Shiqi said, "Both of them are at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, but Shao Fu's cultivation method is clearly better than Yushu's. His spirit force is 30% stronger than Yushu's. In addition, Shao Fu's spirit technique and spirit blade are stronger than Yushu's. If this continues, Yushu will undoubtedly lose." "Then what do you mean? Yushu will win?" Delta Orgi didn't understand. "You were the one who said Yushu was inferior to Shao Fu, and now you're the one who said Yushu will win?" Lung Shiqi whispered, "I know Yushu better than you do. Just watch." In the battle, Shao Fu continued to suppress Yushu. At this moment, Yushu was clearly at a disadvantage and even showed signs of defeat. Shao Fu's blade emitted a faint blue light. He found a flaw in Yushu's defense and slashed down. "Pucci!" Shao Fu's blade cut deeply into Yushu's shoulder. He sneered, "Aren't you arrogant? Try being arrogant again." Seeing this, the other 3 disciples of the 6 Unity spiritual realm all revealed expressions of relief. However, Yushu also smiled strangely. In the next moment, a saber had appeared in his left hand at some unknown time. Immediately after, a blade aura as fast as light slashed toward Shao Fu's throat. Chapter 293. Lung Shiqi had personally experienced Yushu's trick of exchanging injury for death. Shao Fu's saber was stuck in Yushu's flesh, and he thought that he had won, so he lowered his guard a lot. Unfortunately, the more dangerous it was. Yushu's sudden attack was too fast for Shao Fu to react. Just as Yushu's blade was about to behead Shao Fu's figure suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he had appeared beside Elder Shao. Elder Shao said in a low voice, "Shao Fu has lost this round." Shao Fu was still in a state of shock. If Elder Shao hadn't stepped in to save him, he would have been dead by now. However, he didn't understand. He was stronger than Yushu in every aspect, so how did he lose? No, if this wasn't a bet, but a fight to the death, he would already be dead. However, he still wasn't convinced. He still had a few powerful spirit techniques that he hadn't used, and he also had trump cards. These were all his methods to win. Elder Shao's voice appeared in Shao Fu's mind. "You're the one who's really arrogant. Now do you understand how terrifying the Blood Garment Pavilion disciples are? Their cultivation methods, spirit techniques, and spirit artifacts may not be as good as yours, but they've all climbed out of a pool of blood. Their battle experience and ability to choose between life and death far exceed yours." At the same time, his voice also reached the ears of the other 3 people, and their expressions all became serious. Although Yushu had won, Xiao Fu's attack was very deep and almost cut off his right arm. At this moment, he used his spirit energy to seal the wound, but he didn't leave. He raised his head and said, "Who else?" Lung Shiqi couldn't help but admire Yushu when he heard that. Yushu's taunt skill was really maxed out. As for the other 3 Lioha spiritual region disciples, their serious expressions were instantly replaced by anger. They had never been looked down upon like this before. When Elder Xiao saw this, he secretly sighed in his heart. The temperament of these few disciples was still a little lacking. Wu Xiang quietly stood on his tiptoes at the side. He seemed to be in a good mood. Another youth with a jade crown on his head from the 6 Directions spiritual region walked over and said, "6 Directions spiritual region, Wan Rui, you're already heavily injured. You're no match for me. Admit defeat." Yushu grinned and said, "Even so, I could drag you down with me. Do you believe me?" Wan Rui appeared to be calmer than Xiao Fu, but he was also quite arrogant. He shook his head and said, "Stubborn. I only need one move to defeat you." He wasn't careless either. His hands became as translucent as jade, and with a slap of his palms, the force of 1,000 caddies came crashing down. Wan Rui actually wanted to use force to suppress others. Lung Shiqi also felt that Wan Rui's choice was correct. Yushu was already heavily injured, and there was no way he could defend himself. At this moment, Yushu closed his eyes. In less than an instant, he opened them again. Both of his eyes had turned pitch black, without the slightest bit of white in them. Black gas appeared on the blade in Yushu's left hand. He slashed out without any blade energy. Wan Rui thought that Yushu had given up on resisting, but this seemingly ordinary slash strangely passed through Wan Rui's arms and went straight for his head. Wan Rui was shocked. His hands released bursts of jade-colored spirit light. His hands suddenly doubled in size and grabbed Yushu's blade. His hands were filled with great power, and he was actually able to squeeze Yushu's blade until it cracked. However, Wan Rui couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Yushu wasn't lying. He really could drag him down with him. At the same time, Wan Rui's other hand slammed down and a glaring jade light surged. At this moment, Yushu had used up all his strength and no longer had the ability to resist. He could only quickly shout, "I admit defeat." Wan Rui's movements paused, but Yushu laughed sinisterly. "However, you used 2 moves? Haha." Wan Rui's face was as ugly as if he had eaten a fly. He did say that he could defeat Yushu in 1 move, but in the end he still used 2 moves. The people watching were either the higher-ups of both sides or the genius disciples. This made him feel a little embarrassed. Yushu walked back to Lung Shiqi's side and secretly gave himself a thumbs up. Elder Mu flicked his finger and a ray of green light entered Yushu's right shoulder. The originally terrible wound quickly healed in a few breaths of time. Yushu immediately touched his wound in amazement. Then, he immediately became lively again. He actually gave Wan Rui a thumbs up and then gestured down a few times. Wan Rui's eyes burned with anger when he saw this. He squeezed out a sentence through gritted teeth. The Bloodcloak Pavilion is one of the 7 absolutes, but its disciples are acting like this. What an eye-opener. However, the people of the Bloodcloak Pavilion were unmoved. The only one who moved was Xiongming. He walked forward without saying anything. A pair of black fist blades appeared on his arms, and killing intent rose in his eyes. Next was the battle between Xiongming and Wan Rui. Wan Rui didn't dare to underestimate any of the Bloodcloak Pavilion disciples now. He sized up Xiongming. However, he suddenly realized that Xiongming was just standing in front of him, but he had a feeling that he was going to ignore Xiongming. This very strange feeling made him feel a little uncomfortable. He said, "What is your name, sir?" Xiongming didn't answer his question. His body flashed, and his fist blades, which carried traces of demonic qi, arrived in front of Wan Rui. When Wan Rui saw Xiongming attack without even greeting him, he thought to himself, "The people of the Bloodcloak Pavilion are all crazy." However, he didn't slow down. His hands shone with layers of jade light, and he suddenly slapped out with a magnificent aura. With a ding, Xiongming's fist blades clashed with Wanrui's jade-like hands, producing a clanging sound. Xiongming's body moved again. He constantly moved around Wanrui, constantly looking for an opening. Wanrui, on the other hand, used defense as offense. He relied on the strength of his jade-like hands to deal with all kinds of changes. Xiongming was very fast, but Wanrui was strong enough to defeat all of them. Every time they clashed, Wanrui had a slight advantage. If this continued, Xiongming would probably be exhausted and defeated. However, Lung Shiqi, Delta Orgi, and Yushu weren't in a hurry. They all knew that among the four of them, Xiongming was the one who was best at hiding his strength. He probably had some kind of backup plan. After another attack, Xiongming was forced to retreat. This had happened several times already, and Wanrui was getting a little impatient. At that moment, an almost undetectable wisp of blood hidden in the demonic qi silently shot towards Wanrui. He only just noticed it when it was about to touch him. Lung Shiqi was slightly surprised to see that wisp of blood. It was the Line Blood Heavenly Finger. Xiongming had also cultivated the Line Blood Heavenly Finger, and judging from the speed of the wisp of blood, he had already mastered the technique. This sudden wisp of blood caught Wanrui off guard. He reached out with one hand, wanting to crush the wisp of blood. However, the most powerful thing about the Line Blood Heavenly Finger was its penetrative power. The wisp of blood pierced through his jade-like hands, but his jade-like hands had already dimmed. Wanrui secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that a cloud of demonic qi appeared behind him, and a figure emerged from it. It was Xiongming, another Xiongming. Chapter 294. Another Ming Ming had appeared behind Wanrui, but Wanrui didn't notice it at all. Lung Shiqi was a little stunned as well, because he couldn't tell which one was the real body of the infernal underworld. His eyes under the mask turned white, and he was able to tell that the Meng Ming behind Wanrui was the real one. Wu Xiang muttered. Inkfrost ghostly being even taught the underworld ghost clone. Yushu learned the death intent strike, and Delta Orgi learned the ghost bone ice fire sword. TSK. It seems like I'm the only one who didn't teach Lung Shiqi anything. His voice wasn't loud, but he was close to Lung Shiqi, so Lung Shiqi heard what he said. Lung Shiqi was speechless. The scene of the battle naturally fell into the eyes of the people from the 6th Unity spiritual region. They could only watch, but they could not say anything. Once they reminded Wanrui, it would mean that they had lost. Wanrui looked at the blood sky finger that had blocked a sliver of the blood sky finger, and then saw the infernal underworld stabbing towards him. Finally, he stopped defending. He took a step forward, and a powerful aura rushed toward him, blowing his hair. Yushu yelled, "Half-step spirit pulse realm." That's right. The aura Wanrui was displaying was the aura of someone who had transformed their sea of qi into a spiritual sea. He only needed to open one more spirit pulse to reach the spirit pulse realm. So Wanrui had been hiding something. Wanrui clapped his hands, and a violent wave of palm energy rushed out, shattering the Meng Ming in front of him into a cloud of black mist. Wanrui paused for a moment, and then he felt a chill behind him. He turned around, and the other Meng Ming behind him was surrounded by demonic qi, which condensed into 8 spider-like demonic spikes that stabbed at his vital points. Wanrui yelled, and his body lit up with a faint jade glow, but he was too late. The demonic qi of the Meng Ming easily tore through his jade glow, and just as it was about to kill him, Wanrui took out a jade stone from his mustard seed bracelet. At this moment, Elder Shao said, "We admit defeat." "Elder, I haven't lost yet." Wanrui held the jade stone in his hand and said unwillingly, "Enough, come here." Wanrui didn't dare to disobey Elder Shao's words, so he could only leave the stage. This also meant that he had lost, but he felt that he hadn't lost. Haven't you noticed that Humming has been trying to get you used to his attack rhythm? He did it on purpose. From the beginning to the end, all of your reactions were under the control of others, but you were completely unaware of it. I am very disappointed. Elder Xiao's words entered his mind, causing his entire body to tremble. In his battle with Meng Ming, he had indeed thought that Meng Ming was the kind of person who was skilled in movement techniques and flexible in his attacks. Indeed, he had slowly figured out Heng Ming's tactics. Initially, he thought that he would be able to win if he played it safe. However, Tong Ming's blood-heavenly finger suddenly changed. For Wan Ruei, the power of this move was not very strong, so he blocked it. But what he never expected was that the blood-heavenly finger was only a means to attract his attention. It was all for the sake of unleashing the real killer move without anyone noticing. That strange shadow. Thinking of this, Wan Ruei looked at Heng Ming with a trace of shock. His direct combat strength was much higher than Heng Ming's, and he also had trump cards that he hadn't used, but he had still lost. He had lost to Heng Ming's battle rhythm. At this moment, Heng Ming's face was deathly pale, and his body was slightly swaying. However, a trace of fear appeared in Wan Rui's heart. The Blood Robe Pavilion had won 2 battles in a row, which made the people of the Six Directions spiritual region feel a little incredulous. Before coming, Xiao Fu and Wan Ruei had come with the mentality that they would definitely win. Although the Six Directions spiritual region and the Blood Robe Pavilion were both on the world sect ranking, they had never really taken the disciples of the Blood Robe Pavilion seriously. In fact, they even wanted to have fun on this trip. However, now that Xiao Fu and Wan Ruei had been defeated in a row, it was equivalent to a slap in the face. Fortunately, this was an arena battle, not a one-on-one battle. As long as the final victor was one of their people, the Six Directions spiritual region would still win. Therefore, the most important thing was still to see the battle between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators. After winning, Heng Ming didn't continue to stay like Yushu. Instead, he directly walked back. He knew that the next battle would be between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators, so there was no need for him to continue fighting. I'll go first. At this moment, Delta Orgi's voice sounded. Then, she lightly stepped forward and stood upright. The remaining 2 people from the Six Directions spiritual region were a man and a woman. They discussed in low voices for a moment, and the young girl also went up to fight. This young girl didn't use any spiritual power, but she gave off a lively feeling just by standing there. She said in a crisp voice, "Yun Meng Si." Delta Orgi. Delta Orgi? What a strange name. Yun Meng Si tilted her head slightly and muttered. Delta Orgi couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with her. All the bones in her body creaked, and her hair turned silver white. Her aura then skyrocketed. Then, she spun the bone sword in her hand and ignited layers of ghost fire. Netherworld chi spread out in all directions. Delta Orgi didn't probe at all. She actually used such a powerful spiritual technique right from the start. Yun Meng Si's beautiful face changed slightly, but she didn't panic. Her hands flew like flowers, forming one spiritual seal after another. It was full of beauty. She was actually a spiritual caster of the Spirit Pulse Realm. Spiritual casters would undergo a qualitative change after entering the 4 realms of the Sky Realm. If they were compared to other cultivators of the same cultivation, their fighting strength would definitely be extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, dozens of wind blades suddenly appeared behind Yun Meng Si. On each wind blade, there was a strange mark that faintly flashed. The wind blades trembled slightly and emitted a wong-wong sound. Then, she lightly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and floated backwards. At the same time, the dozens of wind blades whistled out. The wind blades sliced through the air and emitted ear-piercing sounds. However, Delta Orgi turned a deaf ear to them. The bone sword in her hand waved out sword shadows, shattering the wind blades one after another. Then, the ghost fire on her bone sword flourished. A faint death chi rose up and pervaded the surrounding area. She waved her arm and slashed out a glaring ghost fire sword beam. Yunmeng Si had been locking her fingers together. Around her, 3 differently colored spheres of light emerged, each releasing a different sense of power. One was as sharp as gold, one was as hot as fire, and one was as heavy as a mountain. Finally, they formed the gold, fire, and mountain imprints respectively. The mountain imprint lit up first. Immediately, a faint yellow light spread out and suppressed the death chi. Then, the gold imprint flickered incessantly. Layers of gold light shields appeared in front of Yunmeng Si, blocking Delta Orgy's sword beam. Finally, the fire imprint trembled and fire arrows shot out one after another. However, Delta Orgy didn't dodge. The ghost fire and the flame collided and easily destroyed all the fire arrows. While Yunmeng Si was stunned, Delta Orgy had already approached her. In front of my ghost bone cold fire sword, ordinary flames don't deserve to exist. Delta Orgy stabbed out. It seemed like only one stab, but in fact, she had stabbed out dozens of times in an instant. So many sword shadows overlapped, gathering an unimaginable power. Yunmeng Si's red lips slightly opened and said a strange word, "Nah." Then, the 3 imprints around her began to twist rhythmically. Gradually, the 3 imprints merged into one. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy rippled out. A golden spear as heavy as Mount Tai and burning with raging flames appeared out of nowhere. Yunmeng Si actually held the spear in her hand and swept out. The surrounding 200 to 300 feet was instantly covered by a dense golden light. Waves of violent waves swept over everyone. Yushu and the other spirit transformation realm disciples turned pale and retreated. Elder Xiao and Wu Xiong both took action to protect their disciples. Lung Shiqi's eyes narrowed. Yunmeng Si's strength was indeed a little beyond his expectations. This was the true combat strength that the disciples of the 6 Directions spiritual zone should have. However, he wasn't worried about Delta Orgy at all, because when the light dissipated, Delta Orgy's figure was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 295. When all the light dissipated, Delta Orgy's figure strangely disappeared. Yunmeng Si's heart tightened. Shortly after, wisps of willow, the wisp's sword light suddenly appeared above her head, forming a sword net that descended upon her. Yunmeng Si's expression finally changed. However, an exquisite bell appeared on her wrist. She shook it lightly, and a crisp sound rang out. Layers of sound waves visible to the naked eye surged out, forming a semicircular spiritual shield. The sword net fell, and the ghost fire swords continuously cut at the spiritual shield, producing an extremely ear-piercing sound. The sound wave spiritual shield kept on twisting, but it still managed to forcibly take on the sword net. Yushu immediately shouted, "Cheating! She's cheating! There's something strange about this bell." If Yushu could see it, so could the others. When Yunmeng Si took out the bell, Lung Shiqi noticed that there was a spiritual technique sealed within the bell. In other words, the sound shield that protected Yunmeng Si just now wasn't her spiritual technique, but an ability that came with the bell. However, this couldn't be considered cheating. It could only be said that her spiritual tool was exquisite enough. At this moment, Delta Orgy's figure strangely appeared beside Yunmeng Si. Just as she was about to launch a sneak attack, Yunmeng Si smiled proudly. Lung Shiqi instantly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, a circular spiritual formation instantly appeared under Yunmeng Si's feet, and countless needle-like streams of water appeared. The streams of water swept out like a storm, as if they wanted to swallow Delta Orgy whole. Water countered fire. Yunmeng Si knew that Delta Orgy's ghost bone-chilling fire was incomparably powerful, so she used the endless streams of water to break it. Facing so many streams of water, even Delta Orgy couldn't dodge. Since she couldn't dodge, then she wouldn't dodge. A bloodline quietly appeared on Delta Orgy's blade. That was the spiritual technique that came with the Seven Fiends art, Carnage Blood. As soon as the bloodline appeared, the ghost fire was instantly dyed into blood flames. Blood flames appeared in the world, and blood fiendish energy spread out. Delta Origi stabbed out with her sword, and in a split second, blood energy soared into the sky, almost wiping out all the water currents. However, there was still a lapse in concentration, and several streams of water still pierced her body. Fortunately, the impact was not great. Up until now, both Delta Origi and Yunmeng-Si had used their trump cards one after another, but neither side could do anything to the other. If they continued to fight like this, they would only be able to compete in terms of spiritual power. Perhaps Yunmeng-Si's cultivation method was slightly better than Delta Origi's, but Delta Origi's cultivation was indeed at the peak of the first level of Spirit Pulse Realm. Therefore, their powers were almost the same. How long would that take? Moreover, there was still a battle coming up. If they could preserve some of their spiritual energy, they might be able to exhaust a portion of their opponent's spiritual energy. At this moment, both of them had the same thought, and that was to decide the outcome of the battle with one move. Delta Origi's originally thin body suddenly became even more delicate, but her aura had already reached the second level of the Spirit Pulse realm. Blood flames rose around her body as her fighting spirit soared higher and higher. A mystical imprint appeared on Yunmeng-Si's forehead, and boundless spiritual power surged continuously. She quickly formed hand seals, and every time she formed a spiritual seal, a few streams of light would gather above her head. Gradually, the shadow of a small palace appeared there. Both of them were accumulating power and waiting to attack. The first to move was still Delta Origi. Her bone sword trembled and let out a hiss. The dense blood, fiendish energy, and blood flames fused together, and suddenly, a blood-colored sword light slashed out like a waterfall. Yunmeng-Si pushed her hands forward, and the shadow of the palace in midair let out a pleasant sound. That sound contained an invisible power, and instantly dispersed a portion of the blood fiendish energy. Then, the shadow of the palace bloomed with a boundless light, and a sound that didn't seem to belong to the mortal world came out. That sound seemed to come from the ancient times, and it shook the heavens and earth, suppressing everything. Delta Origi's blood-colored waterfall was actually shaken to the point that it almost dissipated from the illusory sound of the blade. Then, Delta Origi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. She wasn't injured, but she spat it out on her own accord. That was her blood essence. The blood all fell onto the bone sword, and suddenly, a ferocious blood aura rose into the air. The blood-colored waterfall expanded by a large amount, and tore the shadow of the palace apart. The blood-colored waterfall didn't lose its momentum, and it slashed towards Yunmeng-Si. However, an arm suddenly appeared from the shadow of the palace. It waved lightly, and the huge blood-colored waterfall instantly shattered like a bubble. Delta Origi was hit by the blood essence backlash, and she spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Her body returned to its original state, but she swayed and almost fainted. At this time, a figure held her shoulder, and she didn't fall. While Yushu shouted angrily, "Do you still want your face?" That arm clearly didn't belong to her. What Yushu said could be seen by everyone present. The power emitted by that arm had far surpassed the power of a spiritual pulse realm cultivator, and even the power of a spiritual aperture realm cultivator. That definitely wasn't Yunmeng-Si's own power. If Yunmeng-Si really had such power, the Blood Row Pavilion would have just admitted defeat. What was the point of fighting? Before this, Yunmeng-Si had used that bell, which was more or less acceptable. But this time, it was true that he had cheated. The 5 Sky Origin Realm cultivators of the Blood Row Pavilion, including Wu Xiang, all took a step forward. They didn't say anything, but their meaning was obvious. Elder Xiao also sighed helplessly. Yunmeng-Si is a genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. It's normal for her to have some tricks up her sleeve to protect her. It's just that I didn't think that she would be forced out in the middle of the battle. Why don't we call it a draw? A draw? If that arm hadn't appeared, Delta Orgy would have already won. Why would they call it a draw? The people of the Blood Robe Pavilion were naturally unwilling. Pavilion Master Hateful Blade said, "You and I are both in the Sky Origin Realm. Can't you see the direction of the battle?" Delta Orgy won. Elder Shao shook his head and said, "That might not be the case. Yunming Si is also proficient in several spiritual formations, which can be activated in an instant. Even if there were no external objects to stop her, she wouldn't have lost. Therefore, a draw is the best result." Elder Shao wants to fight on paper? Hateful Blade's words had a hint of sarcasm. Elder Shao was actually feeling very bitter. They were indeed in the wrong, but if Yunming Si lost, their six-direction spiritual region would have lost 3 matches in a row. Even if they won the last match, it would be hard to explain when they returned. However, at this moment, Lung Shiqi, who was supporting Delta Orgy, said something that shocked everyone. Delta Orgy lost this match. What? Yushu exclaimed. Xiongming also looked at Lung Shiqi in surprise. Even the disciples of the six-direction spiritual region had expressions of disbelief. However, Lung Shiqi looked at Yunming Si with a hint of murderous intent in his eyes. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.